Hey everyone, welcome to FanFic Canon. Thanks for hitting play. I'm thrilled to bring this fan-made story to life for you. If you enjoy the ride and want more narrated fanfics, smash, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss an episode. And if you want audiobook of a novel of your choice, join my Patreon. Request any title that's freely available online, and I'll produce a full narration just for you. Now, let's dive into today's adventure.
After returning to Japan, Tatsuya introduced Asia to the group. Everyone was suspicious at first, but once the two of them explained her situation, the mood softened. By the end of the conversation, she was welcomed without hesitation. Once that was handled, Tatsuya moved on to what he called dealing with Diodora. He concealed his presence, turned invisible, and slipped into the Astaroth territory. When he finally located Diodora, he cut down the man's natural healing and filled his entire room with holy artifacts. Even a water supply was swapped out for concentrated holy water. The result was exactly what Tatsuya wanted: constant, agonizing damage with almost no resistance left to dull it. To make sure Diodora couldn't escape or throw anything out, Tatsuya bound every object in the room to his soul. If he tried to leave, everything followed him. If he tried to get rid of an item, it would return instantly. Then came the mental torture. Tatsuya layered a genjutsu over him, forcing him into nightmares of being assaulted by Miltan lookalikes and men dressed as nuns every time he fell asleep. And just to twist the knife without crossing into outright cruelty, he limited Diodora's ability to get an erection to once per month. In Tatsuya's mind, killing him would have been mercy. This was punishment. While checking the room one last time, Tatsuya noticed the prosthetic arm Diodora planned to use in the future. He silently loaded it with magic stones containing both holy and corruptive energy, then masked their signatures. He could have sent Michael proof of Diodora's crimes, but he understood the reality. Michael wouldn't move. The risk of igniting a war with the devils was too high, especially when heaven no longer had its god to protect it. With that job done, Tatsuya returned home and resumed training his team, now including Asia. He set a clear goal. Every member needed to reach at least high-tier ultimate class before the main plot began. They had about 2 years. Training intensified immediately. Most of them barely kept up. Asia was the hardest to shape. Her kindness ran deep, and hurting anything made her break down. Tatsuya started small, making her kill ants, even that made her cry or faint. But she pushed through it little by little until she could train her body, magic, and sacred gear without hesitation. She learned distant healing with almost no efficiency loss. She learned the destructive side of healing magic, the kind that damages organs instead of repairing them. Her physical strength climbed to the point she could match Shizuka in pure hand-to-hand combat. She gained control over every basic element and developed stable ki, though she couldn't form chakra. With ki flight, reinforcement, and ki orbs, she became a mobile healing cannon. Tatsuya also made the group design their own combination attacks without giving them any hints. The results impressed even him. Asia and Shizuka received new energy conduction gloves, improving the flow of power through their fists and turning them into brutal close combat fighters. Their hunting missions showed even more progress. Asia didn't just handle devils and fallen angels. She even killed exorcists, former agents of the church. No hesitation, no trembling. As a team, their growth was staggering. Together, they managed to pressure Kurumi in her human form and force her to stay serious. They couldn't harm her, but the fact that she didn't toy with them was a sign of how far they'd come. 2 years passed like that. Everyone grew more mature, stronger, sharper. Just as Tatsuya planned, the entire group reached high-tier ultimate class and stood at the edge of breaking into their next stages. Ingvild and Kurumi were the exceptions, one sitting at low-tier Satan class, the other at high-tier. Kurumi's tailed beast form pushed her to mid-tier superclass. Standing in front of his team, Tatsuya couldn't help smiling. There were only a few beings left in the world who could threaten him now. He exhaled slowly and thought, So the plot finally begins. Kuo Academy had long been known as a prestigious girls' school, and even after opening its doors to boys, its reputation stayed untouched. The faculty was considered among the best in the country, and students came from everywhere hoping to build their futures. Of course, that didn't stop a handful of people from ruining the peaceful atmosphere every now and then. Right now, in front of the academy gates, two black-haired girls in glasses were greeting the incoming students. Even among the crowd, they stood out. Many boys stared at them with shameless eyes, but a single glare from either girl sent them looking away. Most of the upperclassmen were already used to the pair's intimidating presence. After all, the two were admired across the academy as its new student council president and vice president, Sona Shirtorai and Tsubaki Shinra. They were handing out directions and helping the new students settle in when the peaceful morning shattered. Wani-sama. Both boys and girls erupted at the gates. Sona exhaled quietly. Here we go again. She turned around and greeted the source of the commotion. Good morning, Rias. Akino. Standing before her was a girl with long crimson hair, flawless pale skin, a voluptuous figure, and striking blue-green eyes. She wore the Kuo uniform and carried herself with confidence. She was the academy's top beauty and adored as Wani-sama. She was also the younger sister of Surzex Lucifer. Beside her stood another beauty, black hair tied in a ponytail, violet eyes, and a figure even more provocative than Rias's. She shared the Wani-sama title and was known as the second beauty of Kuo Academy. Akino always drew stares without even trying. Rias smiled at her childhood friend. Good morning, Sona, Tsubaki. You two look like you're working hard already, so we thought we'd help. Sona adjusted her glasses. I appreciate it, but this is my duty as student council president. It's only natural I take care of the new students. Tsubaki smirked. Oh, so you're not waiting for him to show up, president. Sona froze, her cheeks turning pink. Rias lit up. Sona has a crush? That's new. Akino covered her mouth gently. Era. Looks like the president's youth is finally blooming. Sona's blush deepened until she looked like she might steam. She forced herself back in her calm facade. There is no one like that. She barely finished speaking when a familiar voice drifted across the gate. Tatsuya and his group were making their way toward the campus, excitement clear on everyone's faces. It had been a long time since any of them attended school. Tatsuya glanced at the girls beside him and smiled. You all look great in the uniform. Blushes appeared instantly. The girls exchanged quick looks, each determined to guard him from the flock of students they'd soon be dealing with. Miyuki sighed dramatically. If only I were closer to Oni-sama's age, we could have been in the same class. Before anyone could comment, Himari jumped onto Tatsuya's back. Which is perfect for me. I'll get to enjoy school with him while you cry at home. Every first-year girl glared at her immediately, but they also knew there was nothing they could do about it. Asia and Kagura suddenly wrapped themselves around Tatsuya's arms from both sides. Asia looked up at him. I'm excited to study with you. Let's make lots of memories. Tatsuya blinked. Asia sure is getting bold. Kagura then gently turned his face toward her, cheeks burning. I'm also looking forward to being with you. Her shy expression almost broke him. If Asia and Himari weren't hanging off him, he would have hugged Kagura on the spot. The first-year girls groaned. Why can't we study with you? We're technically older than most of the first years thanks to that time chamber. Tatsuya freed himself and turned around. Keyword, technically. According to your documents, you're still younger than us. Groans filled the path as they walked. Himari started teasing Miyuki again, and the two argued the entire way. Soon the academy came into view. Tatsuya spotted Sona and Tsubaki standing with Rias and Akino. He lifted his hand casually. Good morning, Sotan. How have you been? Every girl behind him sighed at once. Here we go again. Sona's face instantly turned bright red. Tsubaki let out a quiet laugh. And here's the one you've been waiting for. Unable to bear it, Sona marched straight toward Tatsuya. Don't call me that here. And don't act so familiar. I'm a student council president. If you act like this, people will think I'm favoring you. Tatsuya clutched his chest dramatically. Cruel. Truly cruel, Sona. After all that time you spent in my room with everyone else, and after all those long hours playing chess with me, now you want to pretend we're strangers." The effect was instant. Sona went fully red. The surrounding students froze. Ria stared wide-eyed. Akino whispered a soft, Meanwhile, Tsubaki and Tatsuya's team were shaking with silent laughter. They even snapped photos when Sona's face hit peak embarrassment. The moment the shutter sound clicked, Sona snapped out of her shock. "Don't say things that people will definitely misunderstand." After Tatsuya and the others cleared the misunderstanding, Tatsuya and his went towards the gate. At the gate, Tatsuya looked at Tsubaki and smiled at her and said, "Good morning, Tsubaki. It's been a long time since the last time we met. I hope that you take care of me while I will be in school." Tsubaki, who looked at his smiling face, blushed a bit and said, "Why, yeah, it's been a long time, and if you find any problem regarding the academy, make sure to come to me." Tatsuya nodded his head and then went inside the school without bothering to talk with anyone. The girls who were left behind were talking with Sona and Tsubaki. Himari came close to Tsubaki and asked, "We know that Sona is bound to her chess bet, but why haven't you proposed to Tatsuya yet? You like him as well, right?" Tsubaki, who heard her, blushed and said in a low voice, "Is it that obvious?" The others looked at her with a deadpan look and said, "Are you serious? I can bet that even the guy himself knows that you like him, but is not saying anything to make you feel awkward." Tsubaki's blush intensified, and she said, "I will propose him once he beats Sona, or she will feel bad." Sona, who heard her, placed her hand on Tsubaki's shoulder and said, "Tsubaki, I didn't know that you were such a good friend. You know what, just ask me anything and I will try my best to do it." Tsubaki looked at her and said, "Then just lose to him already. How many years are you planning to have your chess date for? And the reason why I decided to propose to him after you is because if you were to know that I was in a relationship with him, you would have increased my workload. So just hurry up and lose." Sona, who heard her queen's words, was twitching her lips, but she had to admit that she too wanted to be in a relationship with him as soon as possible. But still, she was not going to lose on purpose. Sona fixed her glasses and said, "There is no way that I'm going to lose to him on purpose. I accept that I like him, but I will still not forfeit without having a serious match." Tsubaki looked at her king for a while and then sighed and said, "You know, you look kind of cool there, but that still doesn't solve your problem. And did you notice that you finally accepted that you like him?" Sona, who heard her, blushed immediately, but then suddenly all of them stiffened when they heard a voice. "Yeah, both of you took a very long time to finally say that you know," Tatsuya said, looking at all of them while sitting on the wall of the school. Tatsuya then smiled and said, "The school is about to start, so I came to call all of you, but I didn't expect to hear such a discussion." He then looked at his team and said, "Let's go." His team nodded their head, and all of them looked at Sona and Tsubaki and said, "Good luck to both of you," and then left. On the side, Rias and Akino were looking at their friends with an amused expression, and they both were all intrigued by Tatsuya, as he didn't even bat an eye to both of them. Rias looked at Sona once again and thought, "There is something about that boy Tatsuya. Does he possess a sacred gear? Well, let's do some spying and find the truth about him. Also, the girls that came with him also seem to be something. Looks like I'm going to get a ton of new peerage members." She looked at Akino and said, "Find some information about all of them." Akino places her hand on her cheek and said, "Oh, I get to spy on a handsome guy. How lucky I am," and licked her lips. Ria sighed on seeing Akino's antics, and then called Sona and Tsubaki to go back to the classes. Tatsuya, who was walking toward his class in between the uproar caused by the girls who were being all KYA on seeing him, heard Rias's thoughts through his telepathy and muttered, "Try all you want, princess," and kept walking towards the class. Along the way, he made everyone clear to not mess with either him or his team, especially the boys who were lusting after the girls. His one glare made them all stiffen up and drench in cold sweat. Tatsuya then entered his class and noticed that all the second years of his team were in his class as well. Tatsuya also noticed that he was in Issei's class after he found 3 guys sitting together and the girls having a good distance away from them. Tatsuya looked at his girls and said, "Try to maintain as much distance as possible from those 3 pervs." The girls looked at the 3 of them and nodded their heads, after seeing that they were openly reading an adult magazine. Tatsuya then took the protagonist's seat and opened the window to let the breeze come in. The wind coming inside made his hair flutter a bit, adding to his charm, making all the girls and even some of the boys to blush. But still, most of the boys who saw that clicked their tongues and said, "Damn, we got another Kiba here. We don't need any more guys. We just need more cute girls." Hey, but don't you think that the girls who came with him were all hot and cute? Yes, some of them had big tits as well. As Tatsuya heard them, he started to release some killing intent on those boys while he kept smiling. The boys who felt the killing intent started to sweat and got scared. They all looked at him, and once they saw his smiling face, they all immediately froze up. Tatsuya looked at them, still smiling. He then raised his hand, moved it towards his neck, and then motioned his thumb to be slashing his neck. All of the boys nodded their heads and looked towards the board. Tatsuya stopped releasing his killing intent, making all of them take a deep breath simultaneously. All the girls who saw that were beyond amazed that he was able to control all the pervs in the class with ease and decided to give him the title of the King of Kuo, about which Tatsuya didn't even give a fuck. Soon the teacher came to the class, and after introducing themselves, the classes begun. Soon after the classes began, while Tatsuya team was beyond bored. They all had already studied all that they will be taught because of the grace of Tatsuya. They all soon stopped listening to the teacher and started to talk to each other through the mental links that he had created for his team. Tatsuya used his telepathy and decided to hear other people's thoughts and was very disappointed that most of the boys in the class were actually fantasizing about something perverted rather than studying. The most he was annoyed was with Issei, who was thinking about swimming in the sea of boobs while shouting, "OPPAI." Tatsuya sighed, but then he felt a presence inside Issei. He concentrated on it and knew that it was his sacred gear. He concentrated even more and soon entered inside the sacred gear's core and saw a land covered with flames. He then looked around and saw a huge red dragon sleeping there. He then walked towards the dragon and said, "You hop. You awake." The dragon grunted in displeasure, but still didn't open his eyes. Seeing that, Tatsuya smiled maliciously and then used his magic to make Drake dream about him being fucked by Albion. Soon Drake woke up in cold sweat and shouted, "No, Albion, you cannot do that. And even if you want to, I will be the dominating one, as I am the dragon of domination, not you." Tatsuya looked at him with a sweat drop and said, "Bro, seriously?" Drake, who heard the voice, looked at Tatsuya, and he wanted to explain himself, but thought that it would only make matters worse. There was an awkward silence there, and Drake decided to break the silence and said, "Who are you, human? Are you my new host?" Tatsuya shook his head and said, "No, I'm not your host. I am just currently looking inside the sacred gear, Drake." Drake, who heard him, widened his eyes in surprise and said, "You know me?" Tatsuya nodded and said, "Yeah, Albion told me about you once." Drake was even more shocked and asked, "How do you know Albion? Are you his host?" Tatsuya again shook his head and said, "Albion's host is my friend, and we have fought quite a few times. So in a sense you can say that I'm Albion's friend." "Oh, by the way, I'm Tatsuya. Nice to meet you." Drake nodded his head and said, "Yeah, nice to meet you as well. I am Drake, the heavenly dragon of domination." Tatsuya then laughed and said, "I heard just now when you want to dominate Albion in bed." Drake, who heard him, immediately glared at Tatsuya and said, "That's all happened because I had a nightmare." Tatsuya and Drake then began to talk to each other, and Drake started telling him his adventures with his previous hosts and his life when he was alive. Soon a realization hit Drake, and he asked, "By the way, do you know who my host is, and how strong is he?" Tatsuya, who heard him, nodded his head and said, "Yeah, your host is the biggest pervert ever born, even more perverted than Azazel, and about his strength, it would be better that you didn't ask." Drake, who heard him, looked at Tatsuya and said, "Hey, he cannot be that bad." Tatsuya looked at him and said, "He has been dreaming of swimming in a sea of tits while shouting OPPAI since before the time we started to talk to each other, and is still dreaming about that." Hearing him, Drake didn't know what to say and kept his mouth shut. After a while, Drake calmed down, and they again started to talk to each other. Soon the bell rang announcing that the break had begun. Tatsuya looked at Dreyeg and said, "Well, Dreyeg, let's talk later. I would have to leave for now." Dreyeg also stood up and said, "See you later, my new friend. And let's have a spar the next time you come. It has been a long time since I met someone, and by how you describe my current host, it does not look like he would be able to awaken my power anytime soon." Tatsuya only gave him a helpless smile and then left the sacred gear's core. He then came back to consciousness and saw that the teacher was leaving the classroom. He then stood up and was about to ask the others where to go to have their lunch, but before he was able to, he was suddenly surrounded by a lot of girls who started to ask him various questions. The other girls of his team who saw this side, as they knew that this will happen. Tatsuya gave them a helpless smile and gave them a telepathic message to find a place, and he would come later. Tatsuya then talked to the girls for a while and tried to answer most of the questions as possible. Soon he started to get a bit annoyed by them and decided to take shelter inside the men's restroom. Inside the restroom, he met another person who seemed to have been experiencing from the same conditions as him. The boy looked at Tatsuya and gave him a helpless smile, to which Tatsuya replied with one as well. The boy who was with Tatsuya inside the restroom was also known to him. The boy was handsome and had short blonde hair, complemented with his fair skin. He had a small mole under his left eye, and his eyes were bluish-gray. Tatsuya had seen this guy countless times in the anime, and he had to admit that he lived up to the reputation of being called the Prince of Kuo. He was none other than Kiba Yudo the Knight of Rias Gremory. Both of them introduces themselves and talk to each other for a while. Kiba also taught Tatsuya ways to evade most situations when the girls trouble him, to which he was very grateful. Meeting a person who have similar trouble as him made Kiba feel a bit of companionship with him, and they quickly became friends. Tatsuya was happy as well, because he had only few male friends, and having one who is not perverted in a school full of perverts was a perk in itself. They soon left the bathroom together and walked in the corridor, talking to each other. Most of the girls who saw them interacting with each other started to make weird fantasies about both of them, making both of them feel uncomfortable hearing to their comments. Tatsuya and Kiba then exchanged contact information, and soon both of them parted ways. Kiba was going to the occult research club, and Tatsuya was going to the rooftop where he felt that others were. Tatsuya opened the gate of the rooftop and saw all of them sitting there talking to each other. But they were not alone. To his surprise, there was also a wit-haired lowly whom he recognized. The girl as mentioned was a cute lowly with white hair and golden eyes. She looked quite frail and weak and gave the feeling of wanting to protect her, but she was quite a hard hitter, packing some immense brute strength and can pummel any human she wants. She liked sweets and hated perverts a lot. She was Kaneko Tujo, or Chiron, as called by her elder sister Kuroka. Tatsuya approached them and greeted all of them. He then looked at Kaneko, and Miyuki, who was sitting by her side, said, "Oni-sama, meet Kaneko-chan, the new friend that we made today. She even beat all the perverts in the class for us." Tatsuya looked at her with a smile and said, "I am Tatsuya Shiba. Nice to meet you. And I am very grateful that you helped my girls against perverts." Kaneko nodded her head and said emotionlessly, "Nice to meet you as well. I am Kaneko Tujo. I heard a lot about you from these, for in fact, I only heard about you from them." Tatsuya looked at them, who looked away in embarrassment, except Miyuki, who was puffing her chest and looked proud. All the others around her looked at her with sweat drop and decided to ignore it. Tatsuya then sat down and started to have lunch with them as well. Soon Himari and the others took out their desserts and placed it in between. Seeing the sweets in front of her, Kaneko's eyes brightened up. Tatsuya looked at her and chuckled, making her look away with a blush. Tatsuya then smiled and said, Sorry. You can have one as well, Kaneko-chan. Accept it as my apology." Kaneko, who heard him, gave a small smile and moved her hand towards the dessert, but before she was able to grab the one she wanted, it disappeared from its spot, making her widen her eyes in surprise and other sighing. Tatsuya was then seen standing with a coffee jelly in his hand, and he said, "Sorry, Kaneko-chan, but coffee jelly is always mine. You can have something else," and started eating it. Kaneko, who saw the sudden change in Tatsuya's behavior, was beyond shocked. She then looked at others while pointing her finger at Tatsuya and asked, "Is he always like that?" To which they all replied, "Only when it comes to coffee jelly." Kaneko was looking at him weirdly, and Tatsuya, who saw her expression, sighed, and then scooped out some coffee jelly and put the spoon in her mouth and said, "It's only the first and last time. Don't expect me to share it from now on," and started eating again. All of them who saw him do that was shocked. Kaneko, who just ate the coffee jelly, put her hands on her lips and muttered while blushing, "It was an indirect kiss. It was an indirect kiss. It was an indirect kiss." The others looked at Kaneko with a shocked expression, and all of them shouted at once. Onai-sama / Tatsuya / Tatsuya-san shared his coffee jelly. As soon as they shouted that, they all heard Kurumi's and Shizuka's voice over the telepathic link, which said, "WHAT." Kaneko looked at the girls weirdly and said with her cold expression, "You all are shocked about that?" After that day, his school life went forward. Every day, he would enter the class amongst the uproar caused by the girls, and then went talk and spar with Draig inside his sacred gear. And during their spar, Draig was easily beaten by him, though he still didn't show him his true power. Because of the spars between him and Draig, there were occasional bursts of energy which had alerted the two devil heirs about Issei's sacred gear. After that, he would spend his break either with Kiba or his girls and Kaneko. He also spars with Kiba, sometimes in the Kendo Hall, and easily overwhelms him, making Rias take more and more interest in him. Tatsuya also noticed that Akino had already started stalking him, and it was too hard for him to control his girls to not take care of her and explain them what she was doing. Though they were displeased on being stalked, they still decided to follow his instructions and didn't mess with Rias and her group, and Kaneko was their friend as well. Kaneko has also approved of him being near him and did not act too cold in his presence. Seeing this, many of her male admirers also tried to get close to her, only to be instantly shot down because of them being a pervert. Tatsuya also handled the pervert trio after they tried to peep in the changing room, in which Miyuki and the others were changing, and implanted fear in their hearts. Though they still tried peek around the rooms where none of Tatsuya's acquaintance were present. During all this time, Rias tried to approach him, only to be blocked by the girls of his team. Tatsuya also felt the presence of many fallen angels in the town, but decided to keep quiet about it, as he was not responsible for the town, and it was the work of the devil heirs. But from this, he came to know that the events would be beginning soon. Today is their long-awaited weekend, and right now, Tatsuya is working inside his restaurant, and suddenly the door opened, and the customers who came were his acquaintance. Tatsuya looked toward his customers and said, "Oh, Sotan and Tsubaki. Nice meeting you on the weekend." Sona, who heard him call her by his nickname, blushed and said, "Tatsuya, as I remember, I told you not to call me by my nick dash." But before she was able to finish, Tatsuya interjected her and said, I remember what you told me. You told me not to call you by your nickname in school, and by any way I look at it, we are not in school. Right so, Tan." Sona, who heard his reasoning, blushed even harder, but was not able to retort. She grumbled for a bit, and then went ahead to take her seat, along with her many more girls with her as well. Tatsuya looked at them, and then at Tsubaki, and asked, "And they are?" Tsubaki, who heard his question, pointed to the girls and said, "Oh, they're the new student council members. We came here to celebrate their joining the peerage." The girls who heard Tsubaki telling Tatsuya about joining Sona's peerage were shocked and whispered, "Is it all right, Vice President?" telling him about devils. Tatsuya looked at them and smiled and said, "You don't have to worry about that. I know about the supernatural world from a long time, and I also know that she is the Citri heiress." After that, all of them introduced themselves to him, and he did the same. He then eyed each of them and thought, "So Saji has not joined yet, huh?" Tsubaki, who saw him looking at each of the girls there, pouted a bit and asked, "What are you thinking, Tatsuya?" Tatsuya looked at her and said, "Nothing, just thinking that these are the new members of Sona's Yuri harem, that's all." Hearing his words, all of the team members other than Tsubaki got surprised and asked, "Do you mean Sona-sama is into girls?" Tatsuya, who saw them taking the bait, internally smirked and said, "Yes, don't you know, she's a massive pervert who plays around with girls from time to time. In fact, she has not even left her older sister, and she even have her fun with her from time to time at my home, and she told me that she will make her peerage as a harem." The girls who heard him got shocked, but they were still a bit doubtful of him. Then a Momo Hanakai, a girl with a beautiful face and white hair, came forward and said, "How do you expect is to believe that President is not like that?" Tatsuya looked at her and said, "You don't have to believe me, but just think about it. All the members of her team is a girl, beautiful no less, and she doesn't even show any interest in boys as well, and spends all the times with girls." The girls who heard Tatsuya's words were starting to feel that he was indeed saying the truth, and all the things he said were true. Tsubaki, who was standing behind the others, was trying very hard to not burst out laughing. Suddenly a hand was placed in Tatsuya's shoulder, and he turned his head and saw Sona looking at him, and it seemed that some black miasma was leaking out of her body. She looked at Tatsuya in the eyes and said, "What are telling Mai about me, Tatsuya? Do you want me to kill you?" Tatsuya looked at her peerage and said, "See, she is now trying to threaten me as I exposed her plan. Oh, Sotan, how nasty have you become?" Sona, who heard him, was about to lash out at him, but stopped when she noticed her peerage look at her. She then looked at her peerage and was about to explain, but then all of them bowed to her and said, "Sorry, President. Even though we admire you, it is not to the point to have feelings for you. So we are sorry, but we cannot be in a relationship with you." As soon as they said that, both Tatsuya and Tsubaki burst out laughing and said, "Oh my Sona, looks like you were rejected even before you could have proposed. So sad," and continued to laugh. Meanwhile, Sona was blushing from embarrassment as all the others were looking at her with pity and were saying things like, "Poor child," and all. Sona, who had enough of all that, shouted, "There is no such thing like that." After Sona was able to calm down, Tatsuya apologized to her and the other girls for what he did, after which they all sat down, and Tatsuya gave each of them a drink as each apology. After all of them ordered what they wanted, Tatsuya went back to kitchen to prepare their order. The girls looked around the restaurant and saw that it was very crowded. They all then looked at Sona and Tsubaki and asked, "This place is really crowded. Is the food here that good?" Sona and Tsubaki both nodded their head, and Tsubaki said, "Yeah. When it comes to cooking, even the Citri family chefs are even close to his skill." Hearing her, they all got shocked, as they had eaten with Sona in the Citri house, and they all thought that the food there was very good. And now hearing that Tatsuya's cooking is even better than them, they were very excited. Sona then crossed her arms and closed her eyes and said with a displeased expression, "Even though his food is very good, he is still the meanest person in the whole world." The girls who heard her gave her a wry smile and then started talking to each other. Soon Tatsuya came out of the kitchen with their order and placed it on their table and left. All of them looked at the food served in front of them and were amazed by its appearance and the aroma it was giving. All of them then took a gulp and then started eating their food. After just taking the first bite, all of them had a foodgasm. Even Sona and Tsubaki, who had eaten his food a lot of times, were resistant to that. They all then kept on eating without even bothering to talk with each other, and soon finished their food. After eating the food that they had eaten, they were still not satisfied and decided to order once again. Soon they all finished eating and sat back on the chairs comfortably with slightly bulging tummies. One of the girls, named Rhea, then looked at Momo and said, "That was the best food that I ever had." Momo smiled and nodded her head in approval, and all of them began talking again. Tatsuya then came and said, "I hope that you enjoyed the food," and then placed the bill in front of Sona. All the girls then started talking to him and praising him for the food, which made Tatsuya very happy. Sona took a glance at the bill and then started searching for her wallet inside her handbag. After searching for a while, she was not able to find hers and thought, "Looks like I dropped it on the way." Tatsuya then looked at Sona and asked, "What happened, Sona? You look a bit pale." Sona, who heard him, gave a fake smile, which was not able to convince any of them, and said, "Nothing happened. I am all right." Tatsuya then placed his head on her forehead for a while, and then said, "It doesn't seem that you have a fever." He then looked at her in the eye, making her already blushing face even redder, and said, "Tell me if you are feeling unwell." Sona, who heard his worried voice, blushed and said timidly, "I am not feeling ill. It's just I lost my purse and would not be able to pay." Tatsuya, who heard her, had a sudden change of feeling. Previously, he was feeling worried, but after hearing her, his feeling immediately changed to that of mischievousness. He internally smirked and thought, I can take money fro her later, but where is fun in that? He then looked at her and then said, no problem, you can pay me the next time we meet. Sona, who heard him, felt happy, but her happy expression suddenly changed when Tatsuya said, but to see the great Sona Citri owe some money to me. Now that's a first. Sona, who heard him, went to her Citri mode and said, there is no way I can accept that. I will rather work here to pay up than owe someone. Tatsuya, who heard her declaration, showed an evil smile and said, I accept that the heiress of the Citri house will not go back on her word. Sona, who saw his evil smile, wanted to deny it, but still nodded her head with a frustrated expression. Tatsuya then looked at them and said, wait for a bit, and I will check what position to give you to work. Tatsuya then left them, making all of them sigh. They all looked at Sona and said, President, how can you easily fall for his tricks even after you are so smart? Sona, who heard them, clenched her fists and then banged her head on the table and said, I hate him. Tatsuya then went to the kitchen, took out his phone and called someone and said, hey, how have you been? See, there is something that I want to talk with you. Can you come here? Oh, that's great. It's about business, and I assure you that you will surely be happy to have business with me. Okay, I will wait for you. Tatsuya then ended the call and smirked and said, ah, this will be so fun. After waiting for a while, the door of the restaurant opened again, and came a black-haired, two-tailed, beautiful girl in a magical girl cosplay. The Citri group looked at her and immediately looked away. The person who came just now was none other than Seraphal Leviathan, the older sister of Sona. As soon as Seraphal entered, she felt a jolt pass through her body, and she said, Sotan is nearby. My Sotan sense just tingled. She then started looking around, and then her gaze fell on the Citri group's table, much to their displeasure. She immediately rushed towards Sona and hugged her and said, Sotan, I missed you so much. Sona, who was suddenly hugged by her sister, started to struggle and said, Wanisama, not in public, and what are you doing here? Before she was able to answer, Tatsuya came and said, I called her. She glared at Tatsuya and said, why? Tatsuya looked at her indifferently and said, why? To help you, of course. Seraphal, who heard him, looked at Tatsuya and asked, help? What happened to Sotan? Is there someone who is being mean to her? I will kill that person. Tatsuya calmed Seraphal and then told her what was the situation. Seraphal, who heard him, nodded her head and said, there is no problem, I can pay in her stead. After the deal between Tatsuya and Seraphal was done, much to Sona's dismay, all the other members of her peerage and Tatsuya's team decided to join her as well. Seraphal was busy taking pictures and videos of Sona while also preventing perverts from anywhere being near them. Tatsuya, who was looking at the scene in his restaurant while his clones were working, was enjoying a lot. The magical girl dress that he had given them was looking good on them, and he was quite glad that Sona forgot her wallet. Sona was embarrassed wearing the magical girl outfit and was even more angry when she saw her sister taking pictures of her while blood dripped from her nose while she was walking around the restaurant. She then looked at Tatsuya, who was admiring all of them with a pleasant smile on his face, and felt quite complicated. On one hand, she was angry at him for setting him up, but on the other, she was happy that he was enjoying looking at her when she wore that costume. At the end of the day, Tatsuya also met the infamous Miltans who came on hearing the news about the event. He was very happy with the results that were shown by the event and decided to trick Sona once again. After all of them were done, Tatsuya gathered everyone who worked that day and took a group photograph in remembrance of the event. Tatsuya offered all of them to have the dinner with them, to which they all immediately agreed and went to the Shiba residence. Tatsuya decided to do the cooking and looked at girls and said, you guys can go and take a bath, and in the meantime, I will prepare the dinner. All of them nodded their heads to his suggestion, as they were quite tired after working for so long. Once they entered the bathroom, they were quite surprised to see how big and majestic it was. It could be said that instead of a bath, they were in a swimming pool. While bathing, Himari looked at Sona and asked, so are you going to play chess with him after this? When she asked this question, all of them looked at her waiting for a response. Sona looked at Himari and then said, maybe I will play. That will help me relax after going through all that hell. I am so frustrated that I really want to beat him today. Seraphal then came towards her and said, but what if you lose Sotan? Then will you ask him to be your fiancé today? Sona, who heard her sister say that, immediately blushed and put her head under the water. Serafal then looked at Tsubaki and asked, "And what are you waiting for, Tsubaki-chan? Don't you like him as well?" Tsubaki looked at the ceiling and said, "Yeah, I do like him, but I am waiting for my genius master to beat him first, or she will increase my workload because of frustration." She then looked at Serafal and said, "And you are not in any position to ask that, Serafal-sama. Aren't you the same as me, still waiting for a chance to propose to him?" At her words, the other members of the Citri group got surprised that even Amao is in love with Tatsuya. Serafal, who heard Tsubaki, blushed a bit and said, "I will propose to him once he beats Sotan, otherwise Sotan will be much more mean to me." Asia then came beside Sona and said, "Sona-san, a lot of lives are dependent upon you, so try your best to lose against him." Sona, who heard Asia, was not sure whether to feel happy for being encouraged or sad to ask her to lose. Tsubaki and Serafal then looked at Sona and said, like she said, "Just hurry up and lose President/Sotan." After talking and encouraging Sona for a while, they all left the bath, and once they came out, they saw Tatsuya covered only with a towel, and it seemed like he just came out from a bath as well. Tatsuya looked at them and said, "Oh, you're already done. I hope that you didn't experience any discomfort." The girls ignored him and were closely observing every nook and cranny of his body. Some of them even had blood dripping from their nose, and when Tatsuya looked at them and then hugged his body and said, "Oi, perverts, turn around." When he said that, all of them blushed and turned around and asked, "What are you doing here naked?" Tatsuya looked at her weirdly and said, "Just came out after taking a bath in the other bathroom." Tatsuya then looked at Miyuki, who was taking his picture. Tatsuya looked at her for a while and then left them there and went to his room to change his clothes. Soon he came out of his room, and just at the same time, one of his clones came and told them that dinner was ready. Tatsuya and the others then went to have their dinner, and after dinner was done, Sona proposed to play chess with him. Serafal and Tsubaki looked at Sona and said at the same time, "I hope you lose President/Sotan." Sona twitched her lips, but then ignored them and then concentrated her mind on the game. The game went on for quite a while, and everyone was looking at the chessboard very intently. The game was also very intense, as both of them were quite familiar with their playing style, so it took them a lot of time to defeat even a single piece easily. Tatsuya then glanced at Sona and could see her looking at the board seriously. Tatsuya smiled, and then again looked back at the board and concentrated on the game. Tatsuya and Sona continued to play till the midnight, but there was not even a wink of sleep in their eyes. Even the audience were not tired of seeing their match, and to them it looked very intense. The most surprised were the new girls, as they have never seen Sona struggle so much while playing chess. They have seen them how easily she forms strategies and destroys her opponents, but right now in front of their eyes they could see their king struggling quite a lot. Their admiration for Tatsuya grew quite a bit after seeing how well he was faring against their king. Soon Sona found an opening and immediately placed her queen in front of Tatsuya's king and said, "Check," with a smile on his face. Tatsuya didn't care about her joyous expression and immediately defended his king by changing its position. Sona then again placed her queen at a point to block king's path and said, "Check," to which Tatsuya again did the same. Their sequence of check and defense went for quite a while when Tatsuya suddenly smiled brightly and said, "Promotion rook and checkmate." Tatsuya promoted one of his pawns whose way was cleared earlier by Sona when she tried to block the king's path. Sona glanced at the chessboard once again and then gave a slight smile and said, "Looks like I finally got defeated, huh?" Tatsuya sat in a more relaxed position on the chair and stretched his body and said, "Yeah, you sure were." Tatsuya then looked at Sona in the eye, to which she blushed. All of the new peerage members were looking at her intently and were waiting for their king to propose. Sona looked at Tatsuya and said, "Tatsuya, will you dash?" But before she was able to finish, Serafal and Tsubaki pushed her aside and said, "Tatsuya/Tatsuya-chan, please be my boyfriend." Tatsuya was dumbfounded by their action and didn't say anything. He then looked at Sona, who was looking at Tsubaki and Serafal hatefully, and said, "You were saying something, Sona?" Sona's look immediately changed, and she stood up and looked at him and said, I was saying would dash. Himari then came forward and pushed Sona and said, oh, just kiss and finish it. We all know what you want to say. Sona was pushed forward, and just like Himari said, she crashed with Tatsuya, and their lips touched. Tatsuya decided to not waste the opportunity and decided to fully enjoy the kiss. Sona, who was inexperienced in all such matter, was severely blushing, but soon started to kiss him as well. Tatsuya, who noticed her actions, decided to take a step further and inserted his tongue inside her mouth, making her widen her eyes, but soon she melted in the kiss and started to cooperate with him. The people from the sides, especially the Citri group, was looking at them with a blush on their faces and said things like, I didn't knew that president could make such a face. Tsubaki interjected him and said, let her be. She has been desperate for quite a long time. Let her have her time. They all nodded and then both of them left the room and waited for them to come out on their own. After enjoying the kiss with Tatsuya, both of them then came out of the room a few minutes later after the others left. Tsubaki and Serafal also proposed to him, and after a kiss all three of them were finally in relationship with Tatsuya. Though he still had to ask Sona's and Serafal's parents about their relationship, they were not in much of a hurry about that matter. After all, Serafal has recorded Sona's match and has proof that Tatsuya had defeated her fair and square in a chess match. From that day on, the things were progressing normally. Girls following him in school, spars and talk with Drake, fending himself against the girls along with Kiba, lunch with Kaneko and others, kicking the trio's ass and ignoring Rias's invitation. Life was progressing normally for him and the others without any problem, and just like that, time slowly passes away. Tatsuya would occasionally flirt with his girls in school, including Sona and Tsubaki. The other members of her peerage has started to take interest in him as well, except for Ruruko, who had a crush on one of the boys from her middle school, which Tatsuya confirmed to be Saji. Rias seemed to have gotten the wind about Sona's relationship as well and used to tease her a lot. She even tried to set up a meeting along with Tatsuya, through her only to be rejected by Tatsuya himself, saying that he was very busy. During all this time, Tatsuya noticed that not even once has Rias tried to confront him herself, and has only been sending either Akino or Kiba, who only tried to invite him indirectly, as he didn't want to look like a person who approached him only to take advantage of his friendship. Tatsuya was aware of his thoughts and felt happy that Kiba was a good friend, and to not make him stand in an uncomfortable situation, Tatsuya decided to meet that redhead after Issei gets reincarnated as a devil. Tatsuya didn't have to wait for long as he noticed some of the fallen angels stalking Issei. A day after that, he found Issei talking to Yuma on the bridge, which confirmed his intuition about the start of the series. Tatsuya has also told Drake about his host falling in a trap set by fallen angels and how he accepted the proposal of an unknown girl, which made Drake very sad as his host got swayed so easily. Right now, Tatsuya is in a date with Asia, and both of them are standing in front of a girl who blushing intensely and is playing with her fingers while looking down. Asia looked at the girl and thought, from how much she is blushing and fidgeting, it looks like she is about to propose to Tatsuya-san. She then narrowed her eyes and thought, but why is a fallen angel going after Tatsuya-san? The girl standing in front of them was a short blonde-haired loli. The loli then looked at both of them and said, nice to meet you, I am Eri. Both Tatsuya and Asia nodded their heads and said, nice to meet you as well, but didn't give their names as they were still unsure about her actions. Eri then said, you see, I have been seeing you after you leave the school from some time. Hearing her, Asia thought, a stray fallen angel and a stalker no less, and you are trying to propose to him when we both are on a date. There is no way that I will let her be with him. She is a stranger as well. Eri then looked at both of them and said with a blush, and it seems like I have started to like you, so will you dash? Asia looked at her and thought, here it comes. Eri then looked at Asia and said, will you go out with me, Asia-san? Asia, who heard her, blanked out for a while, and then said, hey. Tatsuya, who already knew about her thoughts through telepathy, was trying very hard to stop his laugh after seeing Asia's expression. Isa then calmed down and said, you want to go out with me? To which Eri nodded her head. Asia looked at Tatsuya, who was trying hard not to laugh, and became embarrassed and said, "Tatsuya-san, don't laugh at me." She then looked at Eri and said, "Sorry, Eri-san, I cannot be in relationship with you, as I am already Tatsuya-san's girlfriend." Eri looked hurt and then looked at Tatsuya and showed an angry expression and pointed her finger and said, "With him. What does he have that I don't? I can love you better than him." Tatsuya looked at Eri and said, "I have a dick. Do you have one?" At his comment, the Eri was dumbfounded and didn't know how to retort. Tatsuya then hugged Asia tightly and said, "And you seem to have quite a lot of courage to ask my girlfriend out in front of me, Miss Dashboard." When Tatsuya called her Dashboard, it seemed like an arrow just pierced her heart. The girl looked at Tatsuya and said, "Who are you calling Dashboard? They are still growing." Tatsuya looked at her while still hugging Asia and said, "Whatever you say, Dashboard." Eri grinded her teeth and said, "Yeah." Tatsuya then looked at her coldly and said, "Enough of that. I just want to ask you, how do you know her name when we didn't even introduce ourselves?" When she heard this, her expression suddenly changed and she started sweating. Tatsuya narrowed his eyes and said, "Were you stalking her?" The girl started sweating more when Tatsuya said that and looked at Asia and said, "This guy's not good for you, Asia-san. I have seen him walking around with a lot of different girls." This time, Asia narrowed her eyes and said, "You mean that you were stalking Tatsuya-san as well?" This time she started to get red in anger and then looked at both of them once more and turned around and ran away. Tatsuya looked at her and thought, "Looks like Middle was not experienced in this sort of ploy, and it seemed that these fallen angels are after her sacred gear." Tatsuya then looked at Asia, who was happily hugging him, and enveloped her with a hug as well, and said, "So how does it feel to be confessed in front of your boyfriend?" Asia looked at him and said, "I don't know what to say. I was thinking that she was going to confess to you, so I can say that I feel a little weird about this." Tatsuya smiled and said, "Let's go and have some ice cream, and then continue our date." Asia smiled happily and interlocked her arm with his and continued the date. After receiving the confession from the fallen angel Tatsuya, and Asia continued their date, and in the evening they returned home and told the others about the confession, making Asia feel embarrassed in front of the others. Tatsuya then looked at his team and said, "Jokes aside, this matter might get serious in my opinion." All of them stopped laughing and looked at Tatsuya seriously. Tatsuya looked back at them and said, "You all know that this town is currently a devil territory, right?" All of them nodded their heads in unison, and Tatsuya said, "Then why are there so many fallen angels present inside the territory without the permission of Sona and the redhead? Don't you think it's suspicious?" Shizuka then looked at him and said, "But if they all were stray, then either of those heiresses would have taken some measures. Don't you think so?" Tatsuya looked at her and said, "Yet considering that Sona is very diligent in her work, they would have taken some measures about this matter." Karen then said, "Then that means that this situation is currently seen by the Gremory group. But why aren't they doing their job? Is it that she do not want her job?" Tatsuya closed his eyes and said, "I think it is not like that she don't want to do this. It is just that she is hesitating. Her group is not that large, and even if all of them are quite powerful compared to the fallen angels, they still outnumber them. Though I think they would be more than enough for them. They're hesitating as this job is a bit difficult, and the reward might not be that great for them to do this." Tatsuya then stopped speaking and thought. In the original anime, she only decided that it was worth exterminating the fallen angels only after she learned that she might have a chance to recruit Asia to her peerage. All the other times, she only said that it could lead to serious political matters and then lead to war. He then sighed and said, "That girl is too troublesome." Sanan then looked at Tatsuya and asked, "Then why is she not asking someone's help?" Tatsuya looked at her and said, "Remember, Sona told us about her engagement with Riser and how she hates to be used as the bargaining chip for her family. I guess that she wants to prove that she is a capable heir of the Gremory house and can achieve great things even without the marriage." Kagura asked, "Then why don't she just cancel the engagement? And thinking of Riser-san, he is not that bad once you prove your worth to him. I think he is an understanding person." Tatsuya nodded his head and said, "There are two problems with that. One, Her father is very insistent on marrying her to the House of Phoenix for their wealth and support, and since Rias is only an heir, she do not have any actual say in this matter. 2. It is just as you said that Riser is understanding only after you show your worth, which she have not. She have no rating game record, as she is very young. She is not a genius as well, and she do not possess any achievements of her own. She is only made a high-class devil, only because of her lineage and Surzex being a Mao. In her comparison, I think her queen is far stronger than her. So there you have it, the fact that her only worth is that she is a Grimoire. There is nothing great about her to make Riser understand her situation, and the fact that he is a massive pervert increases his motivation to marry her even more. They all thought for a while and nodded their head, since they all were safe from Riser's lecherous gaze because they were in Tatsuya's team, made them forget about his perversion. Tatsuya then said, "Anyway, that's not the issue we are dealing with. The problem that we are facing is that those fallen angels are after Asia, and the only reason that I could think of must be her sacred gear." All of them then came out of their thoughts and become serious. Tatsuya then said, "I guess that they either want Asia to join their ranks or simply steal her sacred gear for themselves." Ingvild's eyes then widened and she said, "But didn't you said that the sacred gear is connected to one's soul itself?" Tatsuya nodded his head in response and said, "Yes, the sacred gear is connected to one's soul itself, but it can be removed forcefully by various methods. But those methods have various side effects for the original host of the sacred gear. In the worst-case scenario, Ingvild then looked serious and said, "The host can die, right?" Tatsuya nodded his head, making all of them gasp in shock. Asia, who heard the sudden news, became slightly worried, but she then felt a hand on her shoulder. She then turned her head and saw Tatsuya looking at her. Tatsuya then gave a small smile and said, "Don't worry, you are more than capable to take all of them head on, and you have all of us here as well. We can take on any force that threaten us." Hearing his words, Asia felt a bit better and smiled. Tatsuya smiled as well and said, "And even if that's not enough, I can also destroy the whole town, though I have to ask for forgiveness from Yasaka and Amaterasu after that." The girls who heard him suddenly stood up and said, "No, don't do any of that, if you have to visit that goddess again." Tatsuya was dumbfounded by them, but he laughed awkwardly in remembering his last meeting with Amaterasu. She nearly took his virginity after both of them were drunk on the sake that she gave to him and was only able to get out of situation because Yasaka pulled him out of there. Tatsuya then looked at his team and said, "Well, leaving that aside, Asia, I want you to be in company of someone from the team at all times." Asia nodded her head and said, "Understood." Tatsuya then nodded his head and said, "And also one other thing. It seems like some of those fallen angels are stalking other members of the team as well. Make sure to not act suspiciously and only take actions if necessary. And if you have to take the action, either kill them or kill them after interrogating them. Try your best to not let them leave after they have seen your powers." All of them nodded their heads, and Tatsuya said, "Okay, now go and have some rest. We have school in the morning," and all of them left to sleep. After the meeting on that, Tatsuya and his group made sure that someone was with Asia at all time, and all those brave souls who tried to take her with them were mysteriously never seen again. Seeing that their fellow fallen angels were disappearing, the others thought that it was Tatsuya and his group's fault, but since they were unable to detect anything supernatural about them, as they had hid their presence, the only thing that they were able to sense was Asia's sacred gear, as Tatsuya had instructed her to do so, in order to not cause suspicion. Though this plan still had a drawback, as Rias too came to know about the presence of sacred gear inside Asia. But she didn't interfere with her, as she was still busy recruiting Issei. Though Tatsuya thought about taking his sacred gear from him without killing him and asked about it to Drake, but he denied it by giving the reason that Tatsuya was already too powerful and living inside him would only make him feel inferior to him. Tatsuya respected his wishes as he was his good friend and didn't said anything to oppose his decision. He also thought that it would be amusing when he would be called the Boob Dragon in future. Right now, Tatsuya is outside his home, secretly following Issei on his date. Though he was only watching, he thought that it was very amusing as he used his telepathy to hear their thoughts, and how Raynair's thoughts were complete opposite of what she was saying. Soon they reached the infamous fountain inside the park, and he silently sat on the bench and took out some popcorn and then sat back to enjoy the show. Tatsuya saw that Raynair's eyes turned cold, and she started to approach him. He then heard Issei's thought, which said, "Finally, I'm going to get my first kiss, and after that we will go to a love hotel, and then I will finally lose my virginity while enjoying those bouncy tits." Tatsuya, who heard all that, thought, "Dude, even I was not able to go forward in relationship so fast, and even I am a bit on the carnivorous side. And you who cannot even call your crush by her first name for fucking 4 seasons is thinking of getting laid in just one date. How much of self-confidence do you have, dude?" Tatsuya then saw her whispering something in his ears and saw that Issei's expression changed a bit. He then connected to Drake's consciousness and said, "Last chance, Drake. Do you really want your host to become a devil?" Drake heard him and said, "Yeah, as I have observed him through your memories and minor leaks in his consciousness, I believe that this would be the only way that he would be able to survive in this world." He paused for a while and then said, "Though if that Grimmery doesn't arrive on time, make sure to save him. I don't want to be sealed for a long time so soon." Tatsuya heard him and said, "Don't worry, brother. I promise to not let him die. At least for today." Drake became confused and said, "Why only today?" Tatsuya smiled and said, "Knowing him, he would jump on the face of death for tits, and I am not his babysitter to save him every time." Drake twitched his lips, but was unable to deny him. Tatsuya then saw Raynair transform into her fallen angel form, and the first thing that came to Issei's mind was, her tits became even bigger. Tatsuya and Drake both fell silent for a moment, and Tatsuya said, "Drake, just checking this, but are you really sure about this situation and be with him?" Drake thought for a while and then said, "Even I'm starting to regret a bit." Soon Raynair formed a light spear in her hand and then impaled it in Issei's stomach, causing him to lie down in a pool of his own blood. She then said the same lines that she said in the anime and then took off. Tatsuya looked at Issei and said, "Drake, just tell me when he is about to die." Drake only nodded his head in response. Tatsuya and Drake then talked about a bit for a while, and then a red magic circle appeared below Issei. Tatsuya looked at the circle in amusement and thought, so the show finally begins. He then said, "Drake, what do you think about her method of recruiting him?" Drake thought for a while and said, "Well, I think that it was quite a wrong way to do things, but knowing this pervert, he would not have taken things seriously if he would not have died once before being reincarnated as a devil, and truthfully, it doesn't matter to me how she do things. If this brat is able to become stronger, I don't mind if she murder him herself and then make him her servant. The only thing I know is that if he becomes powerful, he could easily fend off those who stand in his way, and that's what is important in this world." Tatsuya then asked, "Then don't you care about your host if he dies?" Drake laughed and said, "I do care about my host's life. That's why I am lowering myself to the level of becoming a servant of the Grimmery brat. If not for that, do you think that the heavenly dragon of domination would bow to anyone? I even asked you to help him if he was about to die." Tatsuya looked at Drake and smiled, and then said, "I guess you really are a good dragon." Drake looked proud and said, "Of course, I am the best. What else do you expect from the heavenly dragon of domination?" Tatsuya looked at him with a neutral look and then said, "Yeah, the heavenly dragon who wants to dominate over Albion in bed." Drake suddenly became pissed and said, "Don't bring that up. It is one of those things that I don't want to be reminded of." Tatsuya laughed for a while and then calmed down. He then looked at Rias and said, "Looks like she's about to go. Well, good night, Drake. Tell me if something interesting happened at your end." Drake nodded and said, "Good night, friend," and then all of them teleported away. After Tatsuya returned home from watching the death show, he directly went to bed without doing anything else. The next day, he told about little incident to his teammates, and all of them had some worries about that matter. They all knew that the sacred gear that Issei possessed was the boosted gear, a mid-tier Longinus, and knowing that magic works on how strong one's imagination is, they all were worried that Issei will come after them with his pervy techniques that he will make in future. Tatsuya knew that it was surely going to happen, so he decided to use Kurumi's ability to know what a person is feeling towards them to make different anti-lust items. These items were able to notify the wearer when someone was feeling lust indicated towards them and notify them in advance. He also added a function which added a thin barrier able to defend them from those techniques and also can be used as a defense mechanism against various attacks. Though this function required to infuse their magic power in the accessory, and the more magic infused, the more strong and durable the barrier. This was best help that he could do for their safety. He even tried to make anti-magic accessories for them, but it turned out that their own magic could not be used if they wear those. They also felt lightheaded when they tried to wear them, so Tatsuya had no choice other than using these defense accessories. He was also confident on their skill that they would be able to send him flying before Issei is able to touch them. The next day, they all went to school, and things went normal for all of them. Tatsuya asked Drake if everything was fine on his end, to which Drake replied that Issei was thinking that all that he went through was a dream. And just like that, the day ended without anything unnatural happening. The day after that was what Tatsuya expected. The whole student body was in uproar as the number one beauty of the academy was coming along with the number one pervert, making all of them shocked to no extent. Tatsuya and the others didn't even care about them, and just like every day, all of them went to their classes. In fact, they all could say that it was a good thing that none of the students were bothering them and were interested in the beauty and the perv. Later that day, Kiba came to their class, causing a mass uproar from the girls and scowl from the boys, except Tatsuya. Tatsuya looked at him and waved his hand, to which he replied with one as well. He then came closer to Issei and said, "Rias Gremory Senpai is asking for you." Issei, who was now scowling on seeing him, suddenly got surprised and said, "Oh, so you're the one who is supposed to fetch me." Kiba nodded his head and then looked at Tatsuya with an anticipatory gaze. Tatsuya looked at him and sighed and said, "Want me to come as well?" Kiba only nodded his head in response. Tatsuya stood up from his seat and said, "Then let's go then." He then sent a telepathic message to his team and said, "Go home without me for today. I will meet the princess first, or else she will not stop bothering." They all agreed with it, and then Tatsuya left with the two of them, making all the girls who saw them curse Issei for being with Kiba and Tatsuya. All three of them walked for a while and made some small talk on the way. Issei was starting to feel out of place as both Tatsuya and Kiba were in another league compared to him and was wanting to go back but still went with them. Soon all of them reached an on and worn-out mansion, which was considered as the old school area of the academy. Tatsuya looked at the building and then said, "Kiba, it may be rude, but can you assure me that this building will not topple on us once we go inside?" Kiba looked at him and then said, "Don't worry, it is only like this from the outside, but from the inside it is completely fine." Tatsuya nodded his head, and then all of them entered inside the building. They walked in a hallway, and Tatsuya's gaze fell on a door which said "Keep Out." "So that's where Gasper resides," thought Tatsuya, and then all of them entered a room. Once they entered the room, Tatsuya saw someone familiar sitting on the sofa eating some sweets. Tatsuya waved his hand and said, "Surprised seeing you here, Kaneko-chan." Kaneko, who heard him, got surprised, and then turned her head. Once she saw Tatsuya standing there waving at her, she gave a curt nod and said, "I'm surprised as well, Tatsuya-senpai." Tatsuya smiled and went towards her and sat beside her. Kaneko looked at him and then gave some of her sweets to him, and then both of them sat silently while eating the sweets. While they were doing that, Kiba was explaining some things to Issei, and when Issei saw that there was a shower in the room and the outline of Rias was visible through the curtain, he started perving around. Kaneko saw his expression and said, "Perv." Tatsuya looked at her and said, "Leave him alone. He is not going to stop anytime soon." Kaneko nodded her head, and both of them again started eating sweets. Issei, who heard them, felt disheartened, but suddenly Akino came from inside and then started introducing herself to Issei. She then saw that Tatsuya was sitting along with Kaneko, and when she saw both of them eating sweets, she got a bit surprised and said, "Kaneko is sharing her sweets. That's new." Tatsuya looked at her and said, "Nice to meet you, Himejima-san. I am Tatsuya Shiba." Akino bowed and said, "Nice to meet you as well, Shiba-kun." Soon the redhead princess came out of the shower room. Her gaze then fell on Tatsuya, and she got a bit surprised on seeing him there. But what intrigued her more was Kaneko sharing her sweets. Now, that's a first. Tatsuya looked at Kaneko and said, "Looks like you are famous here for not sharing your sweets." Kaneko blushed a bit and started eating faster. Tatsuya chuckled and started petting her head as she looked cute at that time, and Kaneko started purring unconsciously. Rias then introduced herself, and Tatsuya did the same, and then she started explaining about the supernatural world. Tatsuya didn't listen to her and was focusing on petting Kaneko, who was somehow sitting on his lap. Tatsuya kept patting Kaneko on her head, and everyone was looking at him. Tatsuya looked back at them and asked, "What?" Rias looked at him and said, "Aren't you surprised by all this? After all, I just told you that we all are devils." Kaneko, who was enjoying the head pat, looked at him as well to notice his expression. She was worried that Tatsuya and his team would stop interacting with her if they knew that she was a devil. Tatsuya looked at Rias with a neutral expression and said, "What you mean to say that I should react because you say that you are a devil? Then listen this carefully. I am a human. Now start reacting." All of them who heard him were dumbfounded except Issei, who found that funny and was controlling his laugh. Rias came out of her stupor and said, "No, we really are devils." Tatsuya said, "I am saying the truth as well. I am a human and a male one at that." Rias got a tick mark on her forehead and said, "I can prove to you that we are devils." And all of them brought their wings out, making Issei surprised. Tatsuya looked at Kaneko's wings and cursed at making a jolt of electricity pass through her body. She looked at Tatsuya and said, "Says senpai that to tickles." Tatsuya, who saw her expression, suddenly blushed and stopped touching her wings. He then looked at Rias and said, "I can prove myself as well, but sorry, I'm not into exhibitionism." At his words of them, and even Issei blushed. Rias was about to say something, but Akino interjected her and said, "Then why don't we go in that room, and I can check whether you're saying the truth or not," and licked her lips. At her words, Kaneko hugged Tatsuya and said, "Senpai will not go with you." Akino placed a hand on her cheek and said, Era, Kaneko wants to join as well. That's very naughty of you, Kaneko." Kaneko blushed and immediately stopped hugging him. Rias looked at her peerage and said, "Stop your flirting, Akino. I'm discussing something right now." She then looked at Tatsuya and said, "Are you not surprised, not even a bit?" Tatsuya looked at her and said, "What do you expect me to do? Haven't you seen me hanging around with Sona and her peerage? Do you think that I don't know who you both are, heiresses, heir of Gremory Pillar?" At his words, all of them, except Issei, were hit by realization, and all of them retracted their wings and were feeling ashamed. Tatsuya looked at Kaneko and said, "And you don't have to worry. We will not hate you just because you are a devil." Kaneko blushed and nodded her head and then started eating her sweets. Rias then became all smug and said, "Then it is mock things easier for myself, Tatsuya. I want you to join Dash." Before she was able to finish, Tatsuya said, "Not interested in joining you." Rias, who heard him, said, "Sorry, I guess I heard you wrong. Can you repeat it?" Tatsuya looked at her and said, "I don't want to join your peerage." Rias, who heard him, was surprised and used her devil's charm and said, "Why not you can even make your own harem if you become a high-class devil." Tatsuya looked at her with an expression which said, "Really?" He then said, "I don't need that. Haven't you seen me coming to the school daily with all my girls? Why would I require to become a devil just for a harem?" Rias was dumbfounded by that, and everyone was looking at her holding their laughter. Rias started to turn red in embarrassment, but then she pointed her finger at Tatsuya and said, "Power? You can get powerful if you become a devil." Tatsuya looked at her and sighed. He then looked at Kiba and said, "Kiba, what is the score of our sparring session?" Kiba thought for a while and said, "I guess we have sparred 25 times with all of them being your wins." Kiba was not depressed by it. In fact, he was happy that he was able to spar with someone strong. Rias, who heard him, was surprised once again and was thinking what to do. Suddenly an idea came to her mind, and she said, "Then if you are really strong, why don't you have a bout with my peerage? And if we win, you will join my peerage," and smirked. Tatsuya looked at her and said, "And what will I get if I win?" This made the smirk disappear from her face. She got in dilemma on what to give him as nothing came to her mind. She thought of giving him authority in the town, but realized that Sona can give him that as well. He gaze then fell on Kaneko, and she said, "You can have Kaneko to yourself for a whole day. Of course, you cannot do anything sexual to her without her permission." Kaneko looked at her and said, "President sold me." Tatsuya didn't wait for long and said, "Deal accepted." Kaneko was shocked once again and looked at Tatsuya. Tatsuya looked at her and said, "Well, you don't want to spend time with me?" Kaneko blushed and said, "It is not that. I don't want to spend time with you. I am just shocked, that's all." Tatsuya smiled and then said, "Then let's get this show on the road." All of them were now in an area enclosed within a barrier around it to prevent the involvement of any third party. In front of him were the whole ORC except Issei and Gasper. Tatsuya was holding Kansho and Bakuya in both of his hands and was waiting for them to finish their planning. After they were done planning, they looked at Tatsuya and asked, "You ready?" Tatsuya nodded his head, and Kiba immediately launched at him. Tatsuya didn't move from his place, and Rias thought that Tatsuya was scared. Kiba found that IDD as well, but knew that Tatsuya was not an opponent who would get scared by something like that. Kiba got close to him and then slashed him with his full power. Tatsuya, who looked at the sword coming his way, slashed back and said, "Full counter." And Kiba was suddenly blown away with a slash wound on his body, making all those watching him shocked. Rias and the others got serious, and Kaneko cracked her knuckles and started running towards him. Tatsuya waited for her to approach him as well, and just when she was about to punch him, he pushed her elbow a bit, blocking the flow of chakra in her hand, making it go instantly numb. This shocked Kaneko, and she was about to punch him with her other hand, but before she was able to, Tatsuya flicked her forehead, making her fly away and crash into the Kiba. Tatsuya then looked towards Rias, but was not able to spot Akino. Tatsuya then suddenly felt something approaching him, and he immediately jumped to his side. "I don't run away. Let me punish you for a bit." Tatsuya looked towards the source of the voice and saw Akino flying in the air. Tatsuya saw her charge some electricity in her hand and then fire it towards him. Tatsuya also didn't wait and slashed at the thunder approaching him and said, "Full counter." Akino saw her own thunder fired back at her and then immediately moved away, but still some of it grazed her. She then looked at the ground, but was not able to find Tatsuya. "Behind you!" Akino heard the voice and turned her head only to find Tatsuya, who has his hands joined and both the index and middle fingers of his hand covered in electricity. Tatsuya then said, "Secret lightning taijutsu, 1,000 years of shocking death," and then poked Akino, making a large amount of electricity pass through her body. All the others who saw her unconsciously grabbed their butts. Akino then started falling while saying, "So good." Tatsuya looked at her, but immediately schooled his head. He looked at Rias and said, "So gonna attack now, princess?" Rias, who heard him, pointed her finger at him and said, "You will pay for injuring my adorable servants," and then started firing her power of destruction at him. Tatsuya threw his swords in a way that they acted as boomerangs, but to Rias, who saw that, thought that he surrendered. Tatsuya then pointed his hands in the attack's direction and fired an energy wave at it. Rias, who saw the wave, was surprised but thought that her attack was stronger and was not bothered by it, but suddenly the swords that Tatsuya threw slashed her, making her scream in pain and crouch down. She then looked up only to find the blue energy wave that Tatsuya fired to come towards her. She closed her eyes, but the energy wave traveled by her only a few millimeters away from her head and struck one of the outer parts of the building, and immediately the whole building was destroyed. All of them looked at the power behind Tatsuya's attack and was scared by it. The most surprised by it was Rias, who was just a bit away from death. Tatsuya looked at the building and said, "Oops, looks like I didn't hold back enough. Anyway, looks like I win." All of them were then brought out of the stupor and was looking at Tatsuya with awe and horror. A green magic circle then appeared in Tatsuya's hand, and he rotated it anti-clockwise, and the whole building was restored. He then looked at the injured peerage and asked, "Want me to heal you?" And all of them nodded their heads. Tatsuya then went towards them with a magic circle still activated, and then one by one healed EAC of them with his time reversal. At Rias's turn, Tatsuya looked at her and said, "So was I powerful enough?" Rias, who heard him, glared at him and said, Your attack could have killed me." Tatsuya simply said, "But it didn't. Didn't you notice that you fell down just as the attack passed by you? It was all planned." Rias, who was not satisfied with it, started to bicker. Tatsuya, who was starting to get annoyed her, said, "That's enough," and then used his time reversal to turn her into a 4-year-old child. All the other team members were surprised by it and had their eyes popping out. Rias looked at her body of a child and was covered in her school uniform, which didn't fit her anymore. She then looked at Tatsuya and said, "What did you do to me? Turn me back this instant." Tatsuya then looked at the child Rias, and then suddenly an idea came to his mind. He then snapped his fingers, and she was immediately covered in clothes of her size. He then picked her up, and before anyone was able to ask what he was doing, and teleported away. Soon he was in front of the school building. He then held Rias in her hands, who kept on punching and kicking him inert her to free herself. Soon he came close to a group of girls and said, "Hey, can you help me?" The group of girls then turned around, and all of them got excited on seeing Tatsuya and said, "How can we help you, Tatsuya-kun? We will try our best to do it." Tatsuya smiled at them, making all, and F them ho kia kia. He then looked at Rias and said, "This girl here is most probably Rias's sister and came here to meet her, but on her way here some perverts harassed her, and now she's scared of boys, so can you please take care of her till someone from her family comes?" They all looked at the girl in Tatsuya's arms and immediately took her from his hands and said, "How cute." Tatsuya smiled at Rias, who was looking at him with a hateful gaze. He then looked at the girls and said, "Why don't you show her around the school?" They all nodded and then started showing her around the school. Soon the girls came in front of the cosplay club room, and being an otaku, Rias's eyes shined. The girls, though, that Rias liked anime and decided to dress her up. An idea came to his mind, and he took out his phone and called Surzex. J.E. then said, "Hey, listen to this. It is very important. Come to my location just this instant, or you will not get a similar opportunity for your whole life." And ended the call. Soon Surzex came to his location, and Tatsuya immediately turned him invisible along with himself and said, "Just wait for that door to open." Surzex thought that there was an enemy coming out of the door and was ready to attack any time. But when the door opened, he saw a child Rias wearing a princess outfit. Surzex was shocked on seeing her and was about to ask about that to Tatsuya and looked at him. But when he looked at Tatsuya, he was holding a small camera. Surzex looked at the camera and thought, the questions can wait for a while. Taking Ryatan's pictures are more important, and took camera from him and started taking her pictures in different outfits. After all that ordeal was over, Tatsuya and Surzex became visible once again and went towards her. On seeing Surzex there, Rias got shocked and was now embarrassed on seeing him there, but still went with him so as to escape from the girls. Once they were away from them, she looked at Surzex and said, "What are you doing here, Oni-chan?" Surzex, who saw her asking cutely, said, "Ah, I missed this expression so much." Tatsuya then looked at him and said, "Enough about that now, the payment for the pictures." Surzex nodded and said, "Is 1 million fine with you?" Tatsuya nodded and thought, 1 million for some pictures of his sister. He is a very big siscon. Surzex signed a check and gave it to Tatsuya. Rias then asked him about the pictures, and Surzex showed her all the pictures that he took, making her more and more embarrassed. Surzex also explained how he knew Tatsuya, and then he went back and Tatsuya turned her back to normal. Soon all of them were back in the ORC clubroom laughing on the whole thing that took place there in school. Rias was all red with embarrassment, and Akino, who saw her king like that, went to prepare some tea for all of them. Soon she came with some tea for all of them and gave them a cup. Rias then said, "Well, after all the things that we went through, I would like to welcome our new member." All of them then looked at Issei, except for Tatsuya and Kaneko, who were both eating sweets along with the tea. Kiba then looked at Issei and said, "Welcome to the team, Issei. I am happy that another male joined the group." And all of them then took a sip of their tea, except for Issei. Issei looked confused and said, "What do you mean, male? I am a 100% biologically certified girl. At that moment, all the teacups except Issei's fell on the ground. After Issei's declaration, the whole clubroom got silent. Tatsuya's brain was not able to process what he just heard. He immediately used his X-ray vision to check her body, and he was not able to find any sausage. He then thought, wait a minute, from what I can remember, the Issei that I met when I was young was most definitely a male. I have seen his wiener when we were changing on our trip to a water park. So how does this Issei is a female? He then looked at Issei and asked, Issei, when the last time we met when we were young, you were most certainly a boy, so how come you are a girl now? Issei looked at him and said, oh, the one you met must be my brother, Issei. We both are twins, and I am older than him by a few minutes. And for your information, my name is Isami, not Issei. Tatsuya, who was dumbfounded by this knowledge, asked Drake, Drake, did you know about this? Drake looked at him and asked, about what? Tatsuya said, about your host being a girl. Drake, who heard him, blinked his eyes for a while and shouted, Nanny. Tatsuya was not sure what to think and showed the image of her confessing to be a girl. Tatsuya then looked at Drake and said, didn't you knew about that before? Drake looked at him and said, how could I know that she has not yet manifested my sacred gear yet, and I'm not able to talk or check her body in this state. I was only able to see what you showed me through your eyes, not my own. Tatsuya nodded his head and then left the space. Rias then asked, then why are you wearing boy's uniform when you are a girl? Issei. Isami scratched her cheek in embarrassment and said, well, it's a force of habit because of some problems. Tatsuya, who was curious, asked, what problem? Isami looked at him and said, well, you knew my brother when he was young, so you must be knowing about his perverted nature, right? Tatsuya nodded his head. Isami then said, well, the problem began in those days. My brother, who was interested in breasts and harem, started his antics when he was young, and I, being his age, also got interested in all those things and started doing all those pervert things till to the point that it became my nature and started to get involved with those things as well. She then stopped for a while and then said, well, things were getting fine for some years, but after that, when my body started to get mature, my brother sometimes looked at me with lecherous eyes. Though he tries very hard to not do that since he had a good heart, but his habits got the better of him from time to time. She had a sad look in her eyes and then said, I started to get conscious of him and tried to live in the appearance of a boy. I cut my hair, wrapped up my breasts using bandages, and wore boys' clothes so as to not being stared by him. She then became neutral and said, well, that's not a big deal. To sum it up, it can be said that I don't want to live as a boy, but I had to live as a guy to live in the same house as my perverted brother, as I didn't have any relatives who lived nearby, and my parents could not afford me living in an apartment alone. Though it is ironic to say that I like to peep like a pervert, but not being stared by one. All of them then smiled at her, but then Tatsuya said, then that means you went on a date with that fallen angel, because you were into girls. Isami then showed him a smug smile and said, why should you choose when you can have both? I swing both ways, and I have to say that you have quite a nice body under those clothes that you are wearing. Tatsuya, who heard her, looked at her with a dumbfounded expression and didn't say anything. Kiba then asked, then why does the whole school think that you are a boy? Your gender must be written in the school documents, right? Isami gave a wry smile and said, you see, both my brother and I applied for this school, but by mistake our father interchanged our form, and genders got changed. Since the rest of the things were similar, we didn't give it much thought and submitted them as it was. Though my brother was not able to enter, as only one seat was left. And all the others call me Huidu, I don't bother explain them, and both my friends already knew about me, as all four of us, including my brother, were in the same middle school. So yeah, it's my first time explaining all this. Tatsuya nodded his head and said, well, princess, do you have any idea how to help your peerage member? Rias gave a nod and looked at Isami with a smile and said, Isami, do you want to move in the dorm where all the female members of my peerage are living? You can freely live as a girl there, and you don't have to pay any rent. Then Tatsuya said, and if it's about your gender problem in school, I can ask Sona to do something about that. Isami, who heard them, smiled happily and said, I would like to do that. Let me ask my parents about this first. Rias and Tatsuya nodded their heads in approval. Suddenly, Isami was grabbed from behind by Akino, who said, "Well, let's see how outrageous your body is to even make your own brother lose control," and then pulled her inside a room. Soon both of them came out of the room, and Isami was dressed in the female uniform. Tatsuya looked at her, and his first thoughts were, how the hell were some bandages were able to hold those weapons hidden? They're at least as big, if not bigger than Rias's. He then calmed down and thought, putting that anime logic aside, I have to say she does look hot. Isami, who noticed his gaze, blushed and said, "Don't stare at me like that. I am still not used to wear these type of clothes." After that, Rias asked Isami to try and manifest her sacred gear, and to Tatsuya's surprise, she was able to manifest her twice critical on the spot. Tatsuya then turned to Drake and asked, "How is her potential?" Drake then said, "Even though we both thought that she was not that powerful, it looks like that it will change soon. She seems to be fairly talented as well. To be able to manifest my sacred gear at the first try is very impressive, but there were a lot of users who were able to manifest the second and even the third form at the first try, so yes, she is talented and will surely become strong if trained the right way." Drake looked at Tatsuya with an anticipatory gaze. Tatsuya looked at him and said, "What? Do you want me to train her?" Drake then said, "Well, why not? You trained your team as well, right? So think of it just like that." Tatsuya said, "Dude, I trained them because they were my team, so their responsibility is on me as well." Drake then grumbled and said, "Then just think of it as helping your friend." Tatsuya looked at him with a deadpan expression and said, "Aren't you asking too much, my friend?" Drake and Tatsuya then had an argument for quite a while, and finally Tatsuya said, "Fine, just stop. I will only train her once a week, and even if she complained once, then the deal is off." Drake looked at him and said, "Stingy." Tatsuya had tick marks on his forehead, and he placed him in a tsukiyomi of him being fucked by Albion. Tatsuya then came back to reality where only a few seconds have passed, and said, "Isami, I just had an argument with some friend of mine, and you'll be training with me every weekend to survive in this world. Just remember, complain once, and the deal is off, and no, you have no choice in this matter." Before she could even say a word, Tatsuya already made it clear that she had to train with him. Rias looked annoyed and said, "Hey, she is my servant. You don't have any right to order her around." Tatsuya, who was already annoyed by the argument he just had with Drake, looked at Rias with a cold glare and said, "Shut up, or I will turn you into a lowly and throw you in a group of lolicons." Rias shuddered on looking at his eyes and hearing his threat and nodded her head. Isaki then looked at him and said, "Then let feel your body after training, as you're making me do it forcefully." Tatsuya looked at her and said, "Oh, have no problems with it. Just remember that take the permission of others, or you would be up for a whole world of pain." After that, Tatsuya went back to his home, leaving the members behind to let them do the devil work. Tatsuya came home and then explained them all the things that happened in the ORC, and just like he thought, all of them were shocked that Isami was a girl. The next day, he talked to Sona, who cleared all the problems in her documents, and Isami also got the permission to move into the dorm and started coming to school in her girly form, making the whole school go speechless. She also informed Tatsuya that she was able to defeat the fallen angel by boosting her power, making Tatsuya surprised. Tatsuya then came to realize that it wasn't the anime world, and the plot armor that Issei had in the original series might not be with Isami. He was also interested in her power, as in the original series, it showed that Issei was only able to beat the fallen angel because of the magic energy released by the manifestation of the sacred gear. And here Isami was able to defeat her and even able to use her boost on her first fight. Tatsuya, who now got the permission to go to the ORC club room, also started to go there from time to time whenever he felt bored, as Drake was mostly asleep because the awakening took a toll on his body. He told Tatsuya that he would be able to recover soon, but he required plenty of rest before that. In the club room, he phased through Gasper's door, making him scared of him at first, but soon he started to feel comfortable with Tatsuya's presence and started to interact with him. Both of them usually spent time to play games together, and Tatsuya would also make him some food from time to time. Rias and the crew were also able to exterminate all the fallen angels in the town, as Isami had already gone through one of Tatsuya's hell's training, making her awaken the second form of the boosted gear, which made Drake conscious as well. And the thing which surprised Tatsuya the most was that Isami was able to boost 15 times just as she awakened it, though Drake said that it was because of her training she went through before awakening him. Isami was also able to communicate with Drake and came to know who made the deal with Tatsuya, though she didn't complain too much about it, as she got strong as well. Isami also started to get close with Tatsuya's team as well, and they too had a good opinion of her. Though at first they were a bit conscious of her perverted nature, they soon opened up after knowing that Isami had a good personality and was a good friend to them. She even got the permission after much effort to feel Tatsuya's body. Rias and her peerage also met with Tatsuya's team, and she even tried to recruit them only to be shot down immediately. Though she felt sad, she shrugged it off soon. Right now, the ORC club room is filled with both Rias's peerage and Tatsuya's team happily chatting with each other. Isami was sitting beside Tatsuya, while both of them were sitting there completely bored as the rest of them were busy talking to each other. Isami looked at Tatsuya and said, "Tatsuya, go on a date with me." Tatsuya looked at her and said, "Isami, you have been asking this question for the past 1 hour, and I told you already I am not free." Isami then looked at the ceiling and said, "Then tell me when you would be free." Tatsuya didn't say anything and remained silent for a while. Soon a thought came to his mind, and he asked, "Isami, mind if I ask you a question?" Isami looked at him and said, "If it is about my 3 sizes, then dash." Before she was able to finish, Tatsuya said, "No, it's not about that. What I want to ask you is, I haven't seen you with your fellow trio and peek in the girls' changing room for a while. Why is that?" Isami looked at him and said, "Well, since I was able to come to school as a girl, I was able to change in the girls' locker room as well. So at first I was able enjoying the sight of all the boobs and butts. But after a while I stopped craving for them. Looks like I was only interested in them because my brother taught me, and also I used to live as a boy for quite some time. And now I don't even feel anything on seeing Rias naked in the shower. And since I no longer need to peep on the girls, our trip broke apart, and now it is only a duo." Tatsuya then looked at her and said, "Then does that mean that you are not into girls and were only interested because you were living as a boy?" Isami nodded her head and said, "Looks like that, but don't worry, even though I've lost my previous motivation, I am now achieving for a different goal." Tatsuya smirked and then said, "What, peep into the men's locker room?" Isami then said, "I would be really happy if that were to happen, but unlike girls who only beat you for peeping, there is a chance that I could be violated by the boys, though I don't think that they would be much of a threat that devils cannot deal through." Tatsuya nodded his head and said, "That might be possible. So what is your new goal?" Isami smiled and said, "To make you take my virginity." At her words, all the girls there glared at Isami, making her shiver because of the killing intent aimed at her. Isami then looked at them and said, "Now interested to talk to me, huh? Listen well, all of you. I'm going to make Tatsuya take my virginity, and maybe can even take his virginity as well." The atmosphere suddenly got tense, and all the girls started to glare at each other, as if all of them were going to backstab each other at any moment. Tatsuya didn't bother in their matter, and decided to let them settle this on their own. He then felt the Citri group come towards the club room, and thought, so it's finally time for getting the familiars. Soon the door of the club room opened, and what Sona and her peerage felt was a feeling of dread spread throughout their body. Kiba and Tatsuya were sitting in one corner of the room and were looking at the scene in front of them while drinking tea calmly. Both of them were used to this and were not bothered anymore by it. Tatsuya then looked at Sona and said, "Yo, Sotan, Tsubaki, nice meeting you here." Sona and Tsubaki got out of their thoughts and looked at Tatsuya and asked, "What happened here? Why are all of them glaring at each other like they're going to kill each other?" Tatsuya said with a neutral face, "They're arguing about who is going to take my virginity." Sona and Tsubaki, who heard him, blanked out for a while and then joined the others in their glaring war as well. Tatsuya and Kiba didn't give a fuck and continued to drink some tea, while Tatsuya brought some snacks that would go along with the tea. He then looked at the rest of the Sona's peerage and asked, "Want to join us?" They all looked at each other and then nodded and went to sit where Tatsuya and Kiba were sitting. After a while, when the glaring war seemed to have cooled down a bit, Tatsuya said, Sona, quit wasting time and tell why you came here. Sona, who heard him, suddenly realized that she had not done the thing that she came for, and the others realized it as well. Saji seemed to be offended by how casually Tatsuya, called Sona, stood up from his seat and pointed his finger at Tatsuya and said, Who the hell are you to call president like that, huh, punk? Are the devils of the Gremory family that rude? Tatsuya looked at him and said, Well, looks like you have forgotten me, but for your information, I am not a devil. Saji ignored what Tatsuya said earlier and only heard that he was not a devil. He smirked and said, Huh, you are a human, then doesn't that mean that you are weaker than me? Tatsuya just smiled, but then Saji fell on the ground and was experiencing a lot of pressure on his body, and he was unable to stand up. Tatsuya then went towards him and crouched down and said, Looks like you have to be educated again, huh? A shitty blonde punk. When Saji heard that name, he suddenly realized something. He then moves his head with great difficulty and looked at Tatsuya and said, That cool aura that you are releasing combined with the cold eyes that can make anyone pale with just a gaze. Don't tell me. Tatsuya smiled and said, Looks like you remember me now, huh? Saji widened his eyes and said, Tatsuya Niki. Tatsuya removed the pressure that Saji was experiencing, and Saji immediately went into Daji's position and said, Forgive me for my impudence, Niki. It will not happen again. Everyone was looking at both of them with a look of surprise. Sona then came forward and said, Do you two know each other? Tatsuya then looked at Saji and said, Your king is asking something? Saji then immediately stood up and said, Yes, this great person who is standing in front of all of you is none other than Tatsuya Niki. Both of us used to study in the same school when we were young, and he was referred as Tatsuya Niki by everyone because of the superiority that he had over us. All of them were dumbfounded by the introduction that Saji gave, and Tatsuya said, Only speak about what is asked of you. Saji bowed and said, I am sorry, Aniki. Tatsuya nodded and then said, Anyway, leaving that matter aside, it's nice to meet you once again. Saji looked up with a look of admiration and said, It should be me who should be happy to meet you again, Aniki. I hope that you take care of me from now on as well. Sona and the others looked at both of them for a while and then said, Anyway, Ryusai came here today to introduce my new pawn Saji Jinchuru to you and your peerage. Saji, who heard her, came forward. Isami, who saw him, said, A pawn just like me. Saji looked at Isami and said, Sorry, sweetheart, I am not a normal pawn like you. I have consumed 4 pawns. Tatsuya then looked at him and said, What you mean to say is that your sacred gear took 4 pawns, right? Saji, who heard him, twitched his lips and said, Aniki, just let me look cool for a bit. Sona then said, Saji, don't behave like that before you know your facts. The one who is in front of you consumed all 8 pawns. Saji's eyes were popping out when he heard Sona. He then said, All 8 pawns, are you kidding me? He then remembered what Tatsuya just told him and said, But it only means that your sacred gear took all 8 pawn, right? Isami snorted and said, Even if that was true, it doesn't change the fact that I have more worth than you and don't think that you are better than me. I have survived Tatsuya. You will surely want to die, but you cannot die training sessions, so I am stronger than you without a doubt. Tatsuya, who heard the name of the training session that he gave her, twitched his lips and decided to make her training harsher than before. Rias then said, What is your real objective, Sona? I cannot think that the ever-so-busy student council president will only come here to introduce her peerage. Sona adjusted her glasses and said, My, how perceptive of you. Yes, I didn't came here just to introduce my peerage to yours. I came here to inform you that we would be going to the familiar forest to get Saji a familiar for himself. Rias then said, Oh, but I was planning on taking Isami as well to let her get herself a familiar. Sona then said, That might be a problem. The familiar master only takes 1 family every month. They both then discussed to play a game of tennis, just like they did in the anime, and left the room. Isami then looked at everyone and asked, Well, what is a familiar? Rias then looked at her, then explained her all about familiars and what all they do. All of them then took out their familiars, and all those who didn't had one looked at them intently, except for Tatsuya. Tatsuya then said, It is good that you all like the familiars, but before that can you please take them off me? Tatsuya said that as all the familiars were clinging to him, an eagle and a bat on each of his shoulder, a wit cat on his head, and some imps clinging to his shirt. All of them then laughed at his condition, and then all of them sent back their familiars. Later that day, most of the school was present around the tennis court, because just like in the anime, both the Devil Heirs are going to play a match, so as to decide who would be going to Familiar Forest. Tatsuya, who was with the group girls who were wearing a tennis outfit for the match. Sona saw him looking at them and decided to make him fluster a bit and asked, "What, Tatsuya? Having lewd thoughts on seeing us like that?" Tatsuya looked at her with the same uninterested expression and said, "My thoughts are 100 times more lewd than what you are imagining." When she heard him, she became flustered and looked away with a blush on her face. Tsubaki and the other two looked at her and started laughing. Soon the match started and went on just like it did in the anime, with Kaneko holding the completely destroyed rackets. Later that night, it was decided that there would be a dodgeball match in which they were allowed to use their powers as well. Tatsuya arrived home late that evening as he was working in his restaurant. When he came home, he found it completely empty, so he decided to use his magic to check whether anyone was there in his house, and only found Kurumi there. He went to her and asked, "Where are the others?" Kurumi looked at him and said, "They are at your school to witness the match." Tatsuya nodded and said, "Then let's go as well. Do you want to come with me?" Kurumi jumped on him and said, "Let's go then." Tatsuya nodded and then teleported with Kurumi. Soon both of them arrived at the gymnasium of their school, but as soon as they reached there, they could hear sound of some explosions. Both of them got alert and then immediately headed inside, thinking that it was some kind of attack. Tatsuya opened the door, and the sight which welcomed him was the gymnasium covered with craters. He then saw some dodgeballs flying here and there. Kurumi then came to his side and asked, "What happened here?" Tatsuya said, "I don't know." Both of them then heard, "Just stand still, you bitch, and let me hit you." Both of them looked at the source of voice and saw Miyuki holding 2 dodgeballs in her hand and aiming at others. Kurumi said, "Miyuki's inner self is out." Himari then threw a dodgeball at Miyuki and said, "And let you have Tatsuya's virginity, no way in hell." Tatsuya, who heard her, twitched his lips and asked, "What the hell is happening here?" As he said that his leg was grabbed by someone. Tatsuya looked towards his leg and saw Kiba completely tattered and beaten up. Tatsuya crouched down and asked, "Kiba, what happened here? Why do you look like you are about to die?" Tatsuya said that and started to heal him. Kiba, who felt his pain subside a bit, looked at Tatsuya and said, "We were just having our dodgeball game like it was planned, and we won as well. I don't know how, but it somehow transformed into a battle royale where the last one standing was allowed to have your first time. Even us boys were not spared by it." Tatsuya and Kurumi got surprised by the information they got, and Kurumi immediately started her planning. Tatsuya then looked at the scene in front of him and saw the girls from Sona's and Rias's peerage accept the kings and queen down on the floor. The rest of them, including his whole team, except Kurumi, were still fighting while throwing the balls at each other. Tatsuya then felt someone grabbing his shoulder and turned his head to the side. He saw Kurumi looking at him with serious expressions, and then Kurumi said, "Stop them or it would not be late before they kill each other." Tatsuya, who heard her, thought that she was over-exaggerating it a bit, but when he saw Miyuki wearing a headband which said, "Kill the bitches, get Onai-sama," he thought that the things can really get ugly. He then used his psychic powers and collected all the balls on the field and made them move in his direction. The girls who were fighting before got surprised and looked where the balls were going only to see their prize standing there. Tatsuya then arranged the balls in rows and columns and started to make them rotate fast. He looked at girls and said, "You have caused enough destruction already. You need to stop this." Miyuki then said, "Oni-sama, don't, but it is our fight," and the others voiced their approval on her claim. Even Asia was supporting her. Tatsuya sighed and said, "Then you leave me no choice." Ji then stamped his fingers and the number of balls multiplied. Tatsuya then glared at them and said, "The one who gets hit is out, right? Then let's see who is able to withstand my attack." He gave an evil smile, making all of them shudder, and then launched all the balls towards them at great speed, completely destroying them in a volley of balls. When all of them were on the ground, completely defeated by Tatsuya's attack, Tatsuya sighed and said, "What the hell were they even thinking, doing something so stupid? Are they some 4-year-old children, deciding all that with just a mere game? Are they idiots?" Kurumi then came to his side and said, "Yes, they all really are idiots, but because of their idiotic act, I've benefited a lot," and smiled. Tatsuya looked at her smiling, but then he realized something and was completely shocked by it. He pointed his finger at her and said, Why you used me?" Kurumi smiled and hit him with a ball as well, and said, "Yup, and now your first time is mine." She then looked at the rest of the girls and said, "Thanks for the opportunity, you guys. I really appreciate it." All the girls looked at her and gritted their teeth in anger, while Kurumi started planning on what to do on her night with Tatsuya. After Tatsuya healed all of them and brought the whole gymnasium back to its original condition, Tatsuya and the Gremory team were back in the ORC celebrating Gremory's and Kurumi's win, though the only one who was happy about her win was Kurumi herself. Rias then looked at Isami and said, "Well then let's go and get you a familiar." She then looked at Tatsuya and said, "You know what, if any of you join my peerage, you can get a familiar for yourself as well." Tatsuya then looked at his teammates and asked, "So girls want to make a deal with the devil?" All of them smiled and said at the same time, "No thanks," making Rias's brows twitch for a bit, but she then sighed and said, "Well, it's regrettable, but I cannot take those who are not a part of my peerage with me," and then teleported with her peerage. Tatsuya then looked at others and said, "Well, shall we go?" They looked at him and said, "Don't you want to see which familiar will she get?" Tatsuya nodded his head and said, "Of course I would like to see, but don't you guys want a familiar for yourself as well? I already made the arrangements." At his words, all of them perked up and hugged and said their thank you and love you stuff. Kurumi then got back inside Tatsuya, and then all of them teleported to the familiar forest as well. As soon as they were teleported, the scene, which awaited them, was a forest which seemed to came out of a horror movie. They looked around for a while, and then the girls said in unison, "Creepy." Tatsuya ignored them and looked at the group of people in front of them who were looking at him and his team with a shocked face. Tatsuya raised his hand and said, "How have you been, Rias and team? Did you miss me?" with a bright smile on his face. The girls who saw him blushed, but then Rias stomped towards him and said, "What are you doing here, Tatsuya? No, leave it. Tell me, how are you even here?" Tatsuya looked at her and said, "What? I don't need to make a deal with the devil to come here. I have my own connections as well. Right, Satsuji?" As he said that, a cheap copy of Ash Ketchum jumped from a tree, surprising the girls who came here for the first time. The person who jumped from the tree was an old man wearing a blue cap with a sleeveless shirt and shorts. The person looked at Tatsuya and said, "Long time no see, my friend." Tatsuya walked towards him and shook his hand. He then looked at his team and said, "Meet him, girls. He is the familiar master. He will show you around and will help you get your familiars. But if you want to roam freely, you are allowed to do that." He then looked at Zatuji and said, "You don't have any problem with it, do you?" Zatuji gave him a thumbs up and said, "I don't usually allow that, but since it is you who is asking me, I don't have any problems." He then looked at others and said, "Okay, I will be going then." He said that and immediately started jumping from tree to tree. The others looked at him and then looked at each other and asked, "Where did he go?" Zatuji then said, "Oh, he must have gone to meet an old friend." Rias then looked at Zatuji and asked, "Familiar Master Zatuji, how do you know Tatsuya, and who is the old friend that you were speaking of?" Zatuji then looked at Rias with a surprised expression and said, "Huh, heiress of the Gremory house? When did you came here?" Rias, who heard him, twitched her lips, but then said, "I have been here before the guy who just left." Zatuji then said, "Well, I didn't notice you earlier. Anyways, I and Tatsuya know each other because he helped me before when there were some stray devils that kidnapped some of the young creatures living here in order to sell them, and Tatsuya was the one who stopped them." They all nodded on the sudden information that they received, and then Rias asked, "And who is the old friend that you were talking about?" Zatuji smiled and said, "Dragon King Tiamat." When he said that, all of them, except Isami and some members of Tatsuya's team, were surprised. Zatuji then looked at the sky and then said, Anyway, let's get the familiars before the full moon sets. Though they wanted to know more about the relationship between Tatsuya and Tiamat, they decided to get their familiars first and ask about it from Tatsuya himself. Tatsuya was jumping from tree to tree for a while and finally landed in front of cave. He then released some of his power to make the others aware of his presence. After waiting for a while, Tatsuya could see a silhouette of a girl coming towards him from the cave, and only after she came closer to him Tatsuya clearly saw her. The girl who was running towards him had a voluptuous figure with light blue hair and fair skin. She wore a deep blue color dress and had blue eyes. The girl then came in front of Tatsuya and said, "So you finally got time to come and see me?" Tatsuya only gave a wry smile and said, "Look, Tia, I was very busy for quite some time, so I was not able to come to the underworld for a while." The lady named Tia, who had a cold expression, softened her gaze a bit and said, "Well, it doesn't matter. What's important is that you at least came to visit me." She said that and turned around and said, "Want to go for a walk?" Tatsuya smiled and nodded his head. Both of them roamed around the forest for a while talking to each other. Soon they came in front of the lake, and Tia asked, "Do you remember this place?" Tatsuya smiled and said, "Yeah, how can I forget? This was where you met with me and Kurumi when you thought that we were the ones who were trying to kidnap some familiars." Kurumi then materialized beside him and said, "Yeah," and she got her ass handed down to him by Tatsuya. As soon as Tia saw Kurumi, she glared at her and said, "Vixen." Kurumi looked at Tia and said, "Long time no see, lizard hag." Both of them then started releasing their auras to dominate over the other. The clash between their auras made the atmosphere around them chaotic and started damaging the area around them. Tatsuya, who saw that, released his own aura and said in a cold voice, "Stop right now." When they heard his cold voice along with the pressure that he was releasing, both of them immediately stopped and said, "It was the hag's/Vixen's fault." They then glared at each other and said at the same time, "My fault. It was clearly your fault." Tick marks appeared on both of their foreheads, and they said, "Stop copying me, you bitch." Both of them then started getting angry, but then Kurumi smirked and said, "To no lizard hag, Tatsuya promised to give his first time to me." As Tia heard that, she zoned out. She then looked at Tatsuya and said, "Tatsuya, is that true?" Tatsuya shrugged his shoulders and said with an uninterested tone, "I have not promised anything. That is something they all decided to do by a competition that the girls had for that very purpose." Kurumi came towards him and said, "Hey, you can't say that. I will be the one to take your virginity." Even Miyuki, who had her inner self awaken that time, agreed to it. Kurumi kept on spouting something for a while, making Tatsuya irritated. Finally being irritated enough, Tatsuya said, Fine, do whatever you want." Kurumi, who heard him, looked at Tia, who was gritting her teeth, and said with a smirk, "Okay, I will do just like that," and then pulled Tatsuya in a kiss. Tiamat, who saw that, had a shocked expression on her face. Kurumi then left Tatsuya, entered her to breathe in some air. She then looked at Tiamat and showed a victorious smirk. Tia, who saw that, glared at her and transformed her hand into draconic claws and said, "Now, that does it, you damn vixen. You dare taint my maid in front of me." Tatsuya looked at her and said, "Hey, when did I agree to that?" But Tiamat and Kurumi ignored him. Kurumi then transformed her hands into claws as well and said, "Bring it on, lizard hag." And both of them started attacking each other. Tatsuya sighed and then placed a barrier around the area and sat down on the ground, took some popcorn from his storage, and watched their match in silence. Once both Tiamat and Kurumi were exhausted after fighting for a while, Tatsuya came towards them and said, "Done yet?" Both of them looked at him and said, "Not yet." Tatsuya sighed and said, "Leave it at that, and Tia, why do you want to be my mate? Doesn't dragons look down on other races as they are inferior to them?" Tia looked at him with resolute eyes and said, "I don't have that kind of mentality. Only the inferior dragons look down on a person's species. Stronger dragons like me appreciate power over background, and most of the dragons want their mate to be strong and capable, and you, who defeated me so easily, is the perfect candidate to be my mate." Tatsuya looked at her and said, "But there are so many strong beings you would have met over the time that you lived in this world. Aren't you interested in any of them? There are those so-called dragon kings and heavenly dragons as well. Even a super devil like Surzex should be able to fight on par with you." Tiamat scoffed and said, "Don't take me for such an easy woman. I have standards of who is worthy of being my mate. Firstly, the other dragon kings are not able to defeat me. Secondly, the heavenly dragons that you talked about are the worst. To fight their own brethren, and that too without any reason, are not even suitable to be called a dragon. And that damn son of a bitch Draig, I wanted to kill him with my own claws for borrowing and then destroying my treasure. If only he would not have died in the three-way war." Tiamat was gritting her teeth, and an aura of anger and revenge leaking from her. Tatsuya looked at her with a sweat drop and thought, Draig would be seriously fucked up if Tiamat would have known that he was currently here. Suddenly, at another part of the familiar forest, Draig started shivering in fear and thought, "I don't know what is it, but it is seriously dangerous for me." Tiamat then calmed down and said, "And regarding non-dragons, most of them are very prideful and look down on others. And that Surzex that you talked about, I don't have any type of feelings towards him. At best, I don't have a bad impression of him, that's all. So that leaves you, who is not only strong, but also don't look down on others just because of their species. You even protected the home of all the little ones who could have died because of the clash between our powers by making a barrier. And unlike most powerful humans who look on dragons as a means to increase their reputation by slaying them, you spared me even after I tried to attack you and gave me a chance to explain my actions." She then walked close to him and said, "What else do you want me to think before deciding to make you my mate?" Kurumi scoffed and said, "I don't know, maybe feel love towards him." Tiamat glared at Kurumi and said, "Shut up, you vixen, how can you say that I don't like him? The way he cared for me after I was injured after his attack, and the consideration he showed by not hurting the young dragons who were wary of him and were attacking him for injuring me. And all the dates we went on around the forest and underworld. Those were some of the happiest moments of my life." Suddenly, the atmosphere around them suddenly got tenses, and both Tatsuya and Tiamat looked at Kurumi. Kurumi was looking at both of them with a smile, but the pressure she was releasing was saying something different. Kurumi then said, "Oh, so Tatsuya went on some dates with you, and that too without telling us, huh?" Tatsuya, who heard that, thought, "Even though I would be able to neutralize this situation, but all the things I will go through would be troublesome. Let's try to resolve it right here." Tatsuya looked at Kurumi and said, "I came here to meet with her, but that was because I was the one who injured her and wanted to check that she was all right. And when I was here, she asked me that she wanted to visit some places, and I tagged along with her because she asked me to. In no way I was informed those were dates at all." Kurumi narrowed her eyes and asked, "Really?" Tatsuya nodded his head and said, "Really?" She then stopped releasing pressure and said, "I will believe you for now, but make sure nothing like that happens from now on." Tiamat then looked at Tatsuya. "Anyway, ever since that time, I have a feeling of being together with you and want you to be my mate." Tatsuya looked at her and focused in her eyes. He could feel that what she was saying was true. He then sighed and said, "I don't have any problem with that, but you dash." Before he was able to finish, Kurumi said, "But you have to get the permission of the others as well, and in this case, you have to make me accept you as among all the girls I know you the best," and smirked. Tiamat, who heard that, gritted her teeth, but then an idea came to her mind and said, "Well, it's most likely that a vixen like you would be wary of me being his mate. After all, you must be worried that Tatsuya would leave an old vixen once he gets to be with me," and gave a mocking smile to Kurumi. Kurumi, who saw that mocking smile, got angered and pointed her finger at her and said, "Bring it on, bitch. We will see whether he leaves me or not." Kurumi said that in anger, but soon realized what she just said. Shit, she tricked me. Tiamat looked at her and said, "What? Don't tell me, Kurumi. A person like you would go back on her word. Well, what can you expect from a vixen such as yourself?" Kurumi gritted her teeth and said, "I would never go back on my word." Kurumi looked at Tatsuya and said, "Now that is done, let's seal the deal then," and immediately pulled him in a kiss. Tatsuya, who was expecting that to happen, thoroughly enjoyed the kiss, making Tiamat blush as she had never done this kind of thing. Soon both of them separated from each other, and were panting heavily. Tiamat then looked at Tatsuya and said, "Tatsuya, make me your familiar." Tatsuya looked at her and asked, "Why do you want to become my familiar?" Tiamat sighed and said, "There are many young and arrogant devils that come here every month and try and make me their familiar. Dealing with them is nothing but a pain in the ass. So if I become your familiar, not only would I be free from all those troublesome devils, but also will have a closer bond with you." Tatsuya nodded and said, "Well, I don't have any problem with that. I originally came here to get some familiars for me and my team. So it is also favorable for me." Tatsuya then formed a contract with her, and a seal appeared on his palm. Tatsuya looked at the seal, which looked like a dragon, and asked, "What is this?" Tiamat smiled and said, "That's the crest that you will get on forming the contract with a strong dragon." Tatsuya nodded and then looked at Kurumi, who was still slightly pissed for being easily tricked by Tiamat, and said, "Kurumi, let's get going. The others must have got their familiars by now." Kurumi looked at him with a slightly displeased expression. Tatsuya looked at her and said, "Well, what goes around comes around. You tricked me earlier, and now you are the one who got tricked. Think of this as karma, that's all." Kurumi, who heard him, pouted and looked away. Tatsuya sighed and pulled her in a hug, and then caressed her back and said, "Don't be mad. You know that I like you a lot, and it doesn't change the fact that you were the first person to be with me. We know each other far longer time than anyone else. Another person who have feelings for me doesn't change this fact." Kurumi snuggled closer to him and said, "Okay, I understand, but you're going on a date with me, and remember that your first time belongs to me and only me." Tatsuya hummed in approval and kissed her forehead. Tiamat, who was watching them, sighed and thought, "Well, I can understand how she feels. After all, it is difficult for beings as strong as this to find a person to rely on." She then smiled with determination and thought, "But it does not mean that my feelings are inferior to yours, and I will prove it." She then said, "I lovebirds, weren't you going back to your pals? Stop flirting in front of me, and even if you want to do that, let me join as well." Both Tatsuya and Kurumi stopped embracing each other, and Kurumi get inside Tatsuya. Tatsuya then looked at Tiamat and said, "Ready to go, Tia?" Tiamat nodded, and both of them started walking towards the others. After that, both Tatsuya and Tiamat reached where the others were, and Tatsuya introduced her as her familiar, much to their surprise. Though they still congratulated him, and Tiamat and Zatuji was especially happy that she was able to find someone that she wished to follow. His team also showed their familiars to everyone. All of them decided to go on their own and find a familiars for themselves, and Tatsuya had to admit that they did a pretty good job. Their familiars had the characteristics that were able to go and sync along with them and could help them while fighting. Isami, just like the anime, was not able to get any familiars, and she was also about to get killed by Tiamat once she knew that she was this generation's Red Dragon Emperor. If not for Tatsuya stopping Tiamat by kissing her in front of everyone to make her forget about the current situation, Isami and Draig were sure to die. But just as soon as Tatsuya stopped kissing her, he saw that all of the girl had their clothes being melted by some sort of green-colored slime, and both Zatuji and Kiba's eyes were also covered by them. The girls who were covered in the slime were making erotic noises, and the melting of their clothes and being naked didn't help but make Tatsuya's little brother rise up. Tiamat, who saw the bulge in Tatsuya's pants, blushed. She then looked at the trees and shouted, "Hey, slime, why are you not falling on me? I want to enchant Tatsuya as well." Tatsuya, who heard her, covered his crotch, but then Miyuki came forward and said, "Oni-Isama, don't bother about those bitches, focus on me and get as hard as you want," and started making some erotic poses. Tatsuya finally tried very hard to control his emotions, and then destroyed all the slimes there with his psychic powers, and then used his time magic to return the now left rags back to the clothes they originally were. Akino then came towards him and whispered in his ears, "I have to admit that you are very healthy down there. I don't mind if you punish a naughty girl like me later when we are alone," and bit his ear slightly. Tatsuya, who was excited earlier, was not able to calm himself after the sudden attack and blushing. And every girl looked at Akino, who was laughing with her hand in front of her mouth. Tatsuya looked at the girls who were just now nearly naked but were now acting as if nothing happened. He then felt a tap on his shoulder and turned around to see Zatuji staring at him. He looked at him for a while and asked, "What now?" Zatuji looked around, checking if anyone was near them, and asked, "You saw them all naked, right? Explain me the whole scene in full detail. Because of that damn slime covering my eyes, I was not able to see anything." Tatsuya looked at him with a deadpan look and then gave a tired sigh. He then placed Zatuji in a genjutsu of him being among a group of naked girls, but just as the girls turned around, they turned out to be Miltans. Tatsuya then looked at the group in front of them and said, "Let's go back. Now I don't know why, but I'm feeling very exhausted now." They all nodded and also decided to go back. He then looked at Tiamat. D asked, "Tia, do you want to come with us or remain here in the familiar forest?" Tiamat looked at him and said, "I'm going with you, of course, though. I will have to come back from time to time to check on the younger dragons." Tatsuya nodded, and then all of them teleported back to the earth, leaving behind Zatuji, who was screaming with fear evident in his voice. The next day, everything went like normal, except Tatsuya being covered by everyone's familiars, and it seemed that they liked him more than their own masters. Tiamat also tried to use this excuse to stick to him, only to be stopped by the combined forces of the other girls. Tatsuya could also see that Rias was not paying attention on anything and was thinking deeply about something. He concluded that there must be some news about Riser that she must have received to make her like that. Though he could see that she was very troubled, he decided to let her think about it on her own, as her mind must be in a chaotic state because of that. He also told the others to not disturb her, and all of them approved of his idea and silently left the club room to let her think alone in peace. Later that night, Tatsuya felt someone enter his room through a magic circle and was immediately ready to attack the person, but when he felt a familiar presence in the room, he sighed and eased his tension. He then thought, "How could she enter the house? I have placed runes all over the house to prevent teleportation by unknown people." Suddenly, he remembered something and sighed. "Oh, I was adjusting them for Tiamat to come and go as she pleased and have deactivated the runes for a while." He then looked at Rias, and despite knowing why she was here, he asked, "What are you doing here in the middle of night, Rias?" Rias looked at him and said in a desperate tone, "Tatsuya, please make love with me," and grabbed his hand. Tatsuya, who heard her desperate tone and even saw some tear in her eyes, was a bit surprised, but shook his head and said, "Sorry, Rias, but I cannot do that." Rias was shocked when she heard him and said, "Why? Am I not good enough for you?" Tatsuya again shook his head and said, "It is not that I don't find you beautiful and attractive, but it is also true that I don't have that kind of feelings towards you. And besides, I don't think that the problem you are facing that you are so desperate about will be solved if I pop your cherry." Rias shook her head and said, "No, I thought over all different possibilities, but this was the only thing that I could come up with. This is the only way that he would not be able to complain." And she started undressing herself. Tatsuya looked at her and said, "Stop right now. Whatever you are doing, the thing that you are planning to do, will not be able to let you out of the problems." But Rias didn't listen to him and finally jumped on his bed, only wearing her undergarments. But before she was able to do anything, Tatsuya used his magic and restrained her using ropes. Rias looked at him, completely misunderstanding his intentions, and said in a sultry voice, "I didn't know that you were so kinky." Tatsuya was about to say something, but before he was able to, a white-colored magic circle appeared in his room, and Graphia appeared from it and said, "Doing something with a lowly commoner, master in Surzexima, would be very sad." Tatsuya looked at her and saw that her eyes were closed. He smirked and said, "Oh, so Graphia thinks of me as a lowly commoner. The truth really is harsh." Graphia, who recognized the voice, immediately panicked and looked at Tatsuya and bowed her head and said, "That's not true, Tatsuya-sama. I don't think of you like that. You are far from a lowly commoner. In fact, I should say that you are a very great and honorable person." She then thought, "Shit, I should have checked where she had teleported instead of simply following her energy signature. Now Tatsuya is sure to be angry with me. And after all the things he did to help me and Venelana-sama." She then heard him chuckling and looked up. Tatsuya, who was laughing, said, Sorry. I'm just joking around. I know that you did not mean that, so don't think too much about it." Graphia then looked at him laughing and blushed a bit. Rias looked between both of them and asked with a confused look on his face, "Do you both know each other?" Grafia looked at her and said in her usually cold tone, "Yes, Tatsuya-sama and I know each other for quite some time, but that's not the issue right now. Rias-sama, I did not expect you to do this kind of thing to get out of this situation." Rias looked at her with a slightly annoyed look and said, "If I don't do this, father and brother won't take me seriously. Besides, it is up to me to decide who I want to give my chastity to. You all have no right to decide that for me." Grafia then picked up Rias's shirt and placed it around her shoulders and said, "Then too you should not show your skin to others so easily. Even I have yet to show him my naked body, even if you are in such a situation, so don't do it before I do that with him. Now let's go and discuss this matter at your home." Rias nodded her head and said, "Okay, but Akino would join me as well." Grafia looked at her with a neutral expression and said, "The priestess of thunder? I don't mind. High-class devils do prefer to have their queens with them in this sort of situations." Grafia then looked at Tatsuya and, as if Tatsuya understood what she wanted to say, released Rias from the ropes. Rias then looked at him with an apologetic expression and said, "I am sorry for making you go along with my selfishness." Tatsuya sighed and moved towards her and patted her head and said, "You are troublesome, a bit arrogant, exhibitionist, and I don't like some of your methods of doing a few things." Tatsuya then paused and looked at Rias, whose brows were twitching because of all the things that Tatsuya said, and was pouting a bit. Tatsuya then smiled and said, "I still consider you as my friend and family, so don't feel bad. I'll try to help you if the things go too much out of your hands." Rias then smiled and said, "Thank you." She then looked at Grafia and said, "Let's go then." Grafia looked at her and said, "Please go on ahead of me. I have something to discuss with Tatsuya-sama." Rias looked at her for a while, but when she saw that she would not be getting any answers from her, teleported away. Grafia then looked at Tatsuya and said, "I would like to apologize once again for what I said." Tatsuya waved his hands and said, "Don't worry about that. I know that you were not aware that Rias would show up at my place." Tatsuya then turned serious and said, "So Riser is coming soon, huh?" Grafia nodded her head and said, "Yes, he is coming, and please don't take such actions that may lead you to some problems with the devils." Tatsuya smiled and said, "Don't worry, I won't take any major actions that might cause some disturbance. And even if I get myself involved, do you really think that I would be in danger?" Grafia sighed and said, "I know that you would not be in danger. What I am worried about is fighting against you. And clearly those who know you and your strength among the devils won't want that." Tatsuya laughed and said, "Don't worry, I am not planning to do anything like that, but there's one thing I am curious about. Didn't the date for their marriage was after Rias completes her studies? So why the sudden change?" Grafia showed an annoyed expression and said, "He wants to make the marriage between the two houses as soon as possible and decided to make haste, and even though Surzek-sama tried his best to stop him, but he was only able to make some special arrangements in order to give her a chance to let her escape from the marriage, and that arrangements are even not in Rias's favor." Tatsuya sighed and said, "That Zeoticus is sure very greedy, and let me guess, the special arrangements that you're talking about must be a rating game, right?" Grafia nodded her head and said, "Yes, that is the way, and Rias-sama has a total disadvantage in this case. Though not the strongest riser, is still plenty strong, and has also won a lot of rating games, so it can be said that he has experience as well." Tatsuya massaged his temples for a while and said, "Anyway, I cannot directly interfere, as it is a decision taken between two high-ranking devil houses." He sighed and thought, some of them really are devils, selling their own daughter for riches, and even that to even before they are born. Truly despicable. He was then brought out of his thinking by Grafia, who said, "By the way, I can compensate you by taking Rias's place, and we can do what she was about to do to you." Tatsuya, who heard her, twitch his lips and said, "Maybe another time. Right now you have some things to do, right?" Tatsuya could have sworn that when he said that, Grafia clicked her tongue before teleporting away. He then sighed and lied back on his bed and slowly drifted into sleep. The next day, Tatsuya and the others went to the school normally, as Tatsuya had not yet told them that Riser would be visiting today. The school went on normally, and at the end of the rest of his team decided to go home and practice with their familiars, much to Tatsuya's surprise. Currently outside the ORC clubhouse, Isami and Kiba were walking towards the clubroom, and Isami asked Kiba, "Kiba, why was the prez spacing out yesterday? Do you have any idea?" Kiba looked at her and shook his head and said, "Sorry, I have no idea about that. Maybe some internal affair of the Gremory house." Isami, though, for a while, and then asked, "Do you think Akino-san would know about it?" Kiba gave a smile and said, "I think she must know. She is President's right-hand woman after all." Suddenly, both Kiba and Isami got alert, and Isami said, "There is someone inside the clubroom. You know that person, Kiba?" Kiba was surprised to see that Isami was able to sense the person inside the clubroom as well, and now understood how effective Tatsuya's training was. Kiba then came out of his stupor and said, "Yes, I recognize this energy signature. Don't worry, this person is not an enemy," and then started walking towards the clubroom. Isami looked at his back and then shrugged her shoulders and started following him. Soon both of them came inside and opened the meeting room door. As soon as they opened the door, the rest of the members of the Gremory group came into sight, along with a silver-haired maid wearing a blue and white French maid attire. Rias then looked towards the door and asked, "You both are finally here. Where are the others?" Isami looked at Rias and said, "The girls went back to train with their familiars, though that was just an excuse, and are now doing some shopping together, and Tatsuya went to the student council to help them with some work." "But who is she?" while pointing at the maid. Grafia, hearing her question, bowed and said, "Nice to meet you. I am Grafia Lucifuge, a maid of the Gremory household." Rias nodded her head and said, "Okay, now there is something that I have to tell you." Grafia looked at Rias and asked, "Rias-sama, do you want me to explain the situation?" Rias raised her hand in order to stop her and said, "Let me do it." She then looked at the others and said, "The truth is dash." But before she was able to say anything, the room lit up in flames, and there was a huge orange-colored magic circle on the floor. Kiba looked at Circle and muttered with a slight venom in his voice, "Phoenix." Then a blonde-haired man dressed in red suit and pants with a witch shirt underneath the coat appeared from the circle. The blonde man said, "Riser haven't been to the human realm for quite some time." He then looked at Rias and said, "Riser have come for you, Rias, my love," with a cocky tone. Isami, clearly not liking his tone, looked at the Grafia and asked, "Who is he?" Grafia kept her eyes shut and said, "He is Riser Phoenix-sama, a pure, blotted devil from the Phoenix household and fiancé to the heir of the Gremory household." Isami then processed the information she just received and said, "Fiancé to the heir of the Gremory household. Then that means he is dash." Grafia nodded her head and said, "Yes, Riser-sama is engaged to Lady Rias." Isami looked at Riser with a shocked expression when she heard that. Right now, both Riser and Rias are sitting on a sofa together close to each other, and Riser was playing with Rias's hair. Aquino then came closer to him with tea and some refreshments and placed it on the table. Riser took a sip and said, "My Rias's Queen's tea is absolutely delicious." Aquino looked at him with an expressionless face and said with a bow, "Thanks a lot for your praise," and then moved away. Riser then placed the cup on the table and then started caressing Rias's thighs, making her peerage grit their teeth in anger. Rias, who finally had enough of her being harassed by him, stood up and said, "Enough, Riser. I have already told you. I will not be marrying you." Riser then stood up as well and said, "But Rias, hasn't your father already made the things clear? You are in no position to be selfish." Rias looked at him and said, "I am not going to sully my family name. I will take a husband, but that person would be someone I want to be with." Riser then said, "Marriage between pure-blooded devils like us is important, as the number of pure-blooded devils has greatly decreased after the previous war. And keeping that in mind, our fathers decided to engage us for the good of the Devil Society." Rias then said, "My father is definitely rushing things too much without even my consent. Anyway, I will not say it again. Riser, I have no intention of marrying you." Riser, who was now a bit pissed, lifted Rias's chin using his hand and said, "Don't forget it, Rias. Riser is the face of the Phoenix clan here, and Riser will not allow you to sully Riser's name. Riser will take you back to the underworld, even if that requires Riser to incinerate all of your servants. After that, both of them released their auras, and Graphia was about to stop them, but before she was able to, there was a knock on the door followed by a voice. "I am coming in." Hearing the voice, the Grimoire peerage, along with Graphia, had a relieved expression on their faces. Rias was a bit panicking, definitely not wanting Tatsuya to hear about her engagement, and Riser was sweating bullets on recognizing the voice. The door opened, and Tatsuya came inside with a bundle of documents in his hands and said, "Sona sent some documents and wants you to go through them." He then looked at Riser and said, "Oh, if it isn't my dear old friend Riser." Riser, who heard him, immediately tried to maintain the expression on his face and gave a 90-degree bow and said, "Nice to meet you again, Tatsuya. Riser hopes that you're doing great." All of them in the room, except Tatsuya and Graphia, were shocked on seeing the sudden change in Riser's behavior. They were not able to believe that the person who was being so arrogant just a second ago was now bowing his head and talking politely to their friend. Rias looked at Tatsuya and asked, "Do you happen to know each other?" Before Tatsuya was able to answer her, Isami said, "Ah, now I remember where have I heard his name before. The others told me while training that there was once a person named Riser who was acting very cocky in front of Tatsuya, and Tatsuya made that person's dick attached to his forehead after defeating him." The room was completely silent after Isami said that. Rias and her peerage turned their heads and were holding back their laugh. Even Graphia was shaking a bit from holding back her laugh. Tatsuya decided to calm the situation and walked towards Riser and moved his hand and said, "I hope that you're doing fine. What is the business that you come here for?" Riser shook his hand and felt a bit grateful that he neutralized the situation as he was feeling humiliated that time. Riser then said, "Yes, Riser is doing completely fine. Thanks for asking, and Riser is here to bring my fiancée back to the underworld to commence our marriage." He then looked at Rias and said, "But Rias here is being selfish and is not going back to the underworld with Riser, even if it is for the good of the devil race." Tatsuya looked at Rias, who looked down with a sad expression on her face. He then sighed and said, "Look, I am not a bearded old man who keeps on saying for the greater good. What I believe is marriage should only be done when there is consent from both the parties, even if it is arranged." He then again looked at Rias and said, "And seeing how sad Rias is, I think she definitely don't want this marriage." Riser, who was surprised by what Tatsuya just said, was a bit angry and then said, "Then what should Riser do? Just go back to the underworld like this?" Riser cannot do that. The name of the Phoenix family will be ruined if something like that happens. Riser was getting agitated by each and every word he was saying, and noticing that Tatsuya started to release his own aura, which made the atmosphere around them quite tensed. Feeling the pressure from Tatsuya's aura, Riser gulped his saliva and bowed his head and said, "Riser is sorry about that." Tatsuya nodded and stopped releasing his aura and said, "Don't worry about that, and I am not saying that you just forgot about the marriage." Tatsuya then looked at Graphia and said, "Seeing that instead of just a letter or message Graphia came in person only means that the red-headed Siscon had already expected such a situation to arise, right, Graphia?" Graphia nodded her head and said, "Just like Tatsuya said, Sir Zexama has already expected such a situation to arise and has decided on a last resort measure if no conclusion is reached." Rias looked at Graphia and asked, "Last resort?" Graphia said, "If you're so insistent on breaking your engagement with Riser-sama, then you can do that by winning a rating game against Riser-sama." On her word, the discussion about the rating game started among the Grimoire group. Riser then showed a slight smile and said, "Riser has participated in a rating game and has won many of them as well." He then looked at Rias and said, "You, who are still not old enough to join the rating game, is an amateur and have no experience." He then asked, "Rias, just asking, is this your whole peerage?" Rias then crossed her arms and said, "No, Tatsuya is not in my peerage." Riser looked at her with a weird gaze and said, "That is clear. Even if you don't tell me Tatsuya-san is leagues above you, how would you even be able to reincarnate him as a devil?" At his words, Tatsuya laughed and said, "Well, Sai Riser, well said. Rias was embarrassed and angry at what Tatsuya and Riser just said, but soon calmed down. Riser then snapped his fingers, and the room was again covered in flames with a magic circle on the floor. Tatsuya looked at the flames and said, "Haven't I told you before, don't use flames with your magic circle, and even if you want to at least decrease the intensity of flames." Riser looked at Tatsuya and bowed his head and said, "I am sorry, Tatsuya-san. I will do that from the next time on my teleportation circle." From the flames, 15 women appeared, each having different physique and wearing different attires. Riser then looked at the ladies and said, "Riser have 15, that means a full set." Tatsuya looked toward the girls and said, "Yo, long time no see." All the girls looked towards Tatsuya and immediately blushed. A short blonde-haired girl with drills walked towards her and said with a bow, "It is nice meeting you again, Tatsuya-sama. I hope that you're doing well." Tatsuya smiled and patted her head and said, "I'm doing great, Ravel, but you don't have to be so formal with me. How about it, let's go and have some ice cream later, my treat." Ravel, who was blushing from being petted, nodded her head and said, "I would love to." Seeing both of them, two people were quite displeased by it. Riser was looking at them and thought, why do Riser get the sun part, whereas Tatsuya-san got the deer? Life is so unfair. Kaneko, who was looking at them, was thinking, that harlot is being patted by the hand which pets me. And some ominous aura started radiating out from her. Isami, who was standing beside her, asked, "Kaneko-chan, is everything all right? Do you want to eat some sweets?" Kaneko looked at Isami and said, "Right now I want to eat some fried chicken. Do you think Tatsuya-senpai will let me kill it?" Isami, who heard her, turned away and thought, "Scary, scary, 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 scary. Kaneko-chan is very scary." After discussion between Rias and Riser went for a while, it was decided that the rating game between them would take place after 10 days. Though this made Rias a bit angry as Riser was showing pity to her, she didn't complain as she knew that she was at a disadvantageous situation. After all the discussion was over, Tatsuya went with Ravel as he promised, and Kaneko also tagged along with them, much to Ravel's displeasure. Kaneko also decided to show her superiority over Ravel and sat on his lap the whole time they were in the shop, making Ravel grit her teeth in anger. Ravel also tried to make Kaneko understand that what she was doing was inconvenient to Tatsuya, but Kaneko only showed her a mocking smile. The next day, early morning, the whole Gremory group and Tatsuya's team were going to the mansion that the Gremory family owned for their training camp. While walking, Rias looked at Tatsuya and said, "I didn't know that you would agree to train my peerage so easily." Tatsuya looked at her and said, "Train? What train?" Rias looked at him with a confused expression and asked, "You came with us to train my peerage for the game, right?" Tatsuya snorted and said, "Who would come for that? I only came here because it was best opportunity to skip classes without dealing with any problems from the student council." Hearing him, his team gave a sigh, and Rias was twitching her lips. She then came in front of him and placed her hands in her waist and said, "Look, if you're staying in the mansion, then you're going to train my peerage as well." Tatsuya looked at her with a neutral look and said, "No problem, but I am not going to babysit you. I will only give you pointers. The rest is up to you." At his words, Isami shuddered. The Gremory group looked at her and asked, "What happened? Why are you shivering?" Isami looked at them and said, "He said the same thing to me before he started his even if you want to die, you cannot die training session. So I guess you should be ready for the worst." At her word, the whole peerage gulped their saliva and looked at Tatsuya, who was standing at starting point of the slope. Soon all of them came near Tatsuya and were about to climb up, but Tatsuya stopped them and said, "Wait, your training starts from now on, and listen, if anyone whines even for a second, then you would be up for hell." He said that in cold tone, making all of them except his team shudder. He then took out some wristbands and gave it to all of them and motioned them to wear it. After all of them wore the bands, they all felt something change in their bodies. Tatsuya looked at their expression and said, "Before you ask, those bands have stopped the flow of your magic and demonic power, making you unable to use either of them." He then used his magic to increase the gravity around them and said, "I have changed the gravitational force around your body a bit. Your task now is to reach the top without taking out those bands within an hour. Any questions?" Rias then raised her hand and asked, Why am I doing something like this? I am the king, and also use magic instead of my body, so this is pointless for me. Tatsuya looked at her with a deadpan expression and said, You said that you are the king, then that means if you retire the whole game is lost instantly. And do you truly believe that the pitiful amount of power that you possess will be able to stop Riser? You must at least be knowing about how a phoenix fights. Rias's brows were twitching, but she could not find anything wrong about what Tatsuya said. She then sighed and asked, Okay, I understand, but what will happen if we are not able to finish this within an hour or take off our bands? Tatsuya showed a malicious smile and said, Believe me that you would better be off without knowing. The whole Grimory group was shivering after seeing Tatsuya smile. Isami then said, Welcome to the training camp of hell. Tatsuya then looked at them and said, Since you all have no more questions, then start climbing. All of them then started climbing with Tatsuya and his team in the front and the Grimory group in the back. The most surprising thing here was that unlike the anime, Isami was able to climb a bit easily and was not complaining about her being the weakest or others being a monster. The one who was suffering the most was Rias, as she was not used to physical activities at all and was lagging behind the others. Later that day, all of them were able to reach the top of the mountain with great difficulty and were sweating and breathing heavily. Tatsuya looked at them and nodded and said, Good, now take a 10-minute break and then come back after changing into your training gear. After a while, all of them were present in front of Tatsuya and his team. Tatsuya looked at all of them and asked, The first step towards your training will be working on your weak points. Now tell me, what do you think is your weak point? All of them were surprised by the question and started to think about it. But being the devils of the prideful Grimory family, they didn't think that they had any weak points except for Isami, who was asked to keep her mouth closed, as she already knew her weak points by training under him. Tatsuya looked at them and asked, What? Answer my question. Rias looked at him with a smile and said, We cannot answer, as we really have no weak points. All of my cute servants are really talented. Hearing their king say that, all of them puffed their cheeks in pride, but their happiness was short-lived because Tatsuya said, Then why did your so-called talented group lose to me so easily? Tatsuya sighed and said, Your first problem is that you all are overestimating yourselves. Let me give it to you straight. As of you are right now, you won't be able to defeat Riser, even if all of you attacked him all together. All of them became angry, except Isami, who knew that what he was saying was true. Rias then said, Hey, there's no way that we would lose to him like that. Even though we have no experience in raiding games, we certainly are strong. Tatsuya then looked at her with a mocking expression and said, Then how about it? Why don't you all fight Asia and prove to me that what you are saying is true? She's our team's latest member to join, so compared to others, she had less time to train. At her words, Rias smirked and said, Don't complain if we hurt her too much. Tatsuya just smiled and looked at Asia and said, You don't have any problems with this, right, Asia? Asia shook her head and said, I have no problems with it, Tatsuya-san, but in return, can I sleep with you tonight? Tatsuya had stopped thinking that the girl standing in front of him was the same he saw in the anime and just messed with her hair and agreeing with her demand. Soon the whole Grimory group, except Isami, were standing in front of Asia, who was adjusting her gloves. Rias looked at Asia with a smile and said, Don't hate us, Asia. We know what Tatsuya asked of you is selfish, but we will try to not injure you. Asia looked at them with a smile and said, Sorry. Rias smiled and said, You don't have to apologize. It is that brute that should be apologizing. Asia shook her head and said, No, I'm apologizing for hurting you in advance, and smashed her fist in the ground, causing huge crack in the ground and a mini earthquake in the field. Seeing the power that the girl packed, the wild group was shocked. Even Kaneko surprised seeing that Asia was stronger than her. All of them jumped to avoid the shockwave that was traveling towards them, but as soon as they jumped to avoid the attack, Asia came in their sight and punched Kiba in the gut, knocking him out. Seeing Kiba taken out so easily, Rias ordered Kaneko to keep Asia busy while both her and Akino prepare their magic. Kaneko nodded and launched towards Asia and punched her. But before the punch was able to connect, Asia grabbed her hand and threw her in Akino's direction. Akino, who saw Kaneko flying towards her, stopped charging her magic and decided to catch Kaneko, but the force with which Asia threw Kaneko was too much for her to withstand, and was sent flying after colliding with her. Rias looked at the situation in front of her and gritted her teeth. She then fired her attack, which she had charged towards Asia, and was thinking that her attack will take Asia down. Asia also didn't stood still and started charging a key wave in her hand and fired it towards Rias's attack, completely overpowering it and finally hitting Rias, making her lose consciousness. After confirming that all of them were down, she came towards Tatsuya, smiling, and said, "Tatsuya-san, I did good, right?" Tatsuya looked at her and was seriously wondering how such an innocent girl could turn into something like this. After Tatsuya was done praising Asia and her mater jumping from happiness, he then said, "You did great, Asia. The fact that despite being a human, you were able to defeat a group of devils. I'm proud of you." He then closed the distance between them and kissed her forehead. Though they didn't tell the others, Tatsuya had already turned Asia into a high human before starting the high school. He also came to know that though not too big, high humans does have some physical improvements over normal humans, and the flow of energy is also efficient in high human bodies. He then said, "Now will you please heal them, and then drag all these talented devils back to their rooms." Asia nodded, and some of the girls went with her to help them put the devils away. Tatsuya then looked at Isami and asked, "After watching the fight, what did you conclude about your teammates?" Isami then looked at Tatsuya and said, "They are very prideful and have not trained at all. They are only relying on contracts to increase their strength. The only person that I can tell worked the most is Kiba, who has at least studied how to use a sword. But he only relies on his speed and has neither much power in his attacks, not endurance to take on hits. Kaneko-chan is the same as well. She is only using her rook traits, but she neither has techniques nor speed to evade or react to attacks." She then paused for a while and then said, "Akino-san is not lacking, but she is doing the opposite of both Kiba and Kaneko. She is not using her queen traits to the fullest and is only using the bishop part of it. So even if her magic is strong, and she is technically stronger than our king, she don't possess the speed to react or evade or the endurance to take on attacks." Now talking about Prez, asterisk to me, it looks like she is only trained to manifest her demonic powers, which continue to grow stronger as she grew up. She don't even have control over her power and only relies on charging up her power and then firing without even knowing about the output she is using. To put simply, she overconfident in her abilities. Tatsuya nodded his head and then looked at her with an appreciative gaze and said, "Good. Looks like teaching you to observe the situation first was a good thing on my part. Now here comes the main question. How do you think will you fare against your teammates, and what rank would you put yourself in among them?" Isami looked at Tatsuya for a while and then sighed before saying, "I am no match for any of them yet. I am not as fast as Kiba nor strong as Kaneko-chan. My magic is not that strong as well. Though after boosting I can fight on par with them, but that is only for a short while, and in a fight there is a chance that they would attack me even before I am able to boost." She then slumped her shoulders and looked down and said, "Right now, I am the weakest in the group." She said that with a sad voice. Tatsuya sighed and patted her head and saying, "You know in your group you have the highest potential to grow. You are hardworking. Know what your weak points are. Try to act only after analyzing the situation, and most of all you have the drive to become strong not for yourself but for your friends. And if you think that you are currently weak, then there's only one thing that you have to do is train till your body falls apart." Isami then looked up and at Tatsuya and sighed before saying, "Yeah, I can only expect that kind of advice for a training maniac. Train till your body falls apart, huh? I am willing to do it if you promise to practice all the positions that I know of in the bed with you," and gave a sultry smile. Suddenly her shoulder were grabbed by someone, and she turned her head only to find Miyuki and Himari holding one each, and said, "Really then, let's go and start your training immediately. Don't worry, both of us will help you a lot in your training." Though both of them had a smile on their faces, but the black aura which was surrounding them said something completely different. Isami gulped her saliva and thought, "I am surely dead today." Later that day, in the evening, the unconscious devils woke up, and after remembering what happened to them, became gloomy. Isami was somehow alive after the training session she had with Tatsuya's team. All of them then gathered on the dining table, and Tatsuya was sitting right in front of Rias, looking at her with a smile on his face, making her grit her teeth and look away in embarrassment. Soon the girls from his team brought the dinner that they prepared, and then they all started eating. While eating, Tatsuya looked at the devils and said, "After today's battle, you all must be knowing that what all are things that you are bad at, but I am not going to ask you, and is going to tell you what I feel and what you would be doing for training during the remaining days." All the devils stopped eating and looked at Tatsuya. Tatsuya nodded and looked at Kiba and said, "Kiba, you have your speed because of your night piece, and your sword style is great as well, but the thing that you are lacking is endurance to withstand attacks and strengthen your attacks while attacking. From tomorrow onwards, you will wear those wristbands I gave you today, along with some weights, and will take on attacks directly. Simply put, you will be a meat shield from tomorrow onwards, and the one who would attack you would be Asia. But don't worry, she will be holding back, and I promise you that you will not be injured. She can use Heal Punch, which only causes pain and no injuries." Though Kiba was a bit worried about being a meat shield, and that too with Asia attacking him, he decided to trust Tatsuya, as it was an opportunity for him to become stronger and could cover his weak points. Tatsuya then looked at Akino and said, "You, Akino-san, will be trying to master your control over the other aspects of your Queen Piece, and will also try to control USM fetish during battle." Akino was a bit conflicted on being asked to control her urges during a battle, but decided to comply with him anyways. He then turned to Rias and said, "Your case is the most serious here. You will be doing basic workout with those wristbands and weights on, and try to maintain your body first. And you have to also control your demonic power as well. You don't have a great control over it. And don't forget to go through all the strategies for the raiding game as well." Rias was a bit angry when she was asked to do basic workouts, but she could not retort to what he was saying and complied. He then looked at Kaneko and said, "We'll be training with Shizuka and will improve your strength and reaction speed. Just like Kiba, you are too much dependent on your rook piece and don't have speed to complement your attacks, and hence you are not able to react or evade easily." Kaneko only nodded her head and didn't give it much thought. She had already decided to believe in him, as he was able to train Asia, who was just a human, to have strength greater than hers, and wanted to be like her as well. After that, all of them finished their meals, and unlike the anime, directly went to bed, as they were too tired to do anything. From next day onwards, they all started to do their training as Tatsuya had told them, except for Rias, who slacked off on her training, though she too trained a bit, so as to not make the others suspicious. The rest of his team had already informed him about her slacking off, but Tatsuya decided to let her do as she pleased, as he was finally enjoying the holidays and were not training then on his own, much to their relief. Tatsuya, though was still resting quite a bit, helped Isami in using her sacred gear more efficiently. Drake had told them that she was close to achieving the balance breaker and tried to help her in achieving it. During the whole time that Kiba was training, he realized why they all say that Tatsuya was a devil when it comes to training. He has been taking hits from Asia from that day onwards, and though he didn't suffer any injuries, he still felt quite a lot of pain. But despite all that, he felt that the training was effective, as both his evasion speed and endurance has improved over the time. Akino has also started to utilize the powers of her Queen Piece, and because of that, her speed and strength have improved a lot. She was also made to do her magic training by continuously exhausting her mana, and then repeat it again when she was recharged, and because of this, both her mana pool and magic strength increased a lot, and now she is officially stronger than Rias. Kaneko's reaction speed has also improved, as she was made to fight blindfolded, which increased her ability to sense with her other senses. Her strength and speed has also increased, though she is still the slowest in her team, except for Isami, who could get faster than her after boosting. And just like that, their training continued, and tomorrow would be the day that they will be fighting with Riser in the raiding game. Currently, it is the middle of the night, and Tatsuya is lying on the ground and is observing the beauty of the night sky. Suddenly, he felt someone's presence nearby and said, "Don't you think that it is time for you to sleep, Isami?" Isami, who was dressed in a tank top and shorts, came closer to him and said, "I can say the same thing to you as well." She then gave a short smile and said, "I cannot sleep, and since I was not able to find your presence nearby, I decided to search for you." She then sat on the ground as well and asked, "What are you doing here, though?" Tatsuya smiled and said, "Just enjoying the night sky here. The sky in the city is not as beautiful as the one we can see here." Isami looked up as well and said, "Yeah, it is truly beautiful." She kept on looking for a while and then said, "Arigato." Tatsuya, who heard her, blinked in surprise and asked, "For what?" Isami looked at him with a smile and said, "For helping me become a girl once again, training me in using my sacred gear, making me stronger, helping me make a lot of good friends." Isami kept on saying things, and Tatsuya finally said, "Isami." Isami looked at him and asked, "Yeah?" Tatsuya then said, "I was not the only one who helped you. Rias was the one who took you in after you decided to become a girl again. Kaneko and Kiba trained you as well in Dash." Before Tatsuya was able to continue, he was suddenly kissed by Isami, making him completely speechless. She then released him from the kiss and said, "I know all about how others helped me, but it can never change the fact that you were the one who helped me the most throughout all these days." Tatsuya, who looked at her, was still in daze, but soon got out of it and thought, "Now that I think about it, what she said could be considered true. I am the one who is helping her the most for all the time. She has been a devil. Not even her own king has helped her that much." Isami then looked at him and said with a blush on her face, "Accept this as my thanks," and started to close in again for kiss, but just as their lips were about to be touched, they heard a cough asterisk sound. Both of them suddenly got startled and moved away from each other and turned around to look at the person who disturbed their moment, and saw Ria standing there wearing a nightgown and glasses and was holding a book in her hands. Isami, who saw her wearing glasses, stopped being nervous and asked, "Prez, is your sight bad?" Rias, who was feeling a bit uneasy seeing both of them kissing each other, came out of her thoughts and said, "No, my sight is not bad at all. These just help me concentrate a bit better while studying," and showed her book. Isami looked at the book and asked, "What book is that?" Before Rias was able to answer, Tatsuya said, "A book on various strategies that could be used in a raiding game." Rias was surprised to see that Tatsuya knew what book she was reading, but shrugged it off. Isami then asked, "Prez, do you mind if I ask, why do you not want to proceed with the marriage?" Rias, who heard the question, was silent for a while, and then sighed before saying, "Because I am a Gremory. This marriage is only taking place not because Riser loves me, but only because he loves the Gremory in my name." Isami then remained silent for a while, and then asked, "Do you hate being a Gremory?" Ria shook her head and said, "I don't hate it. In fact, it could be said that I am quite proud of my name, but being proud doesn't mean that I like all aspects of it." She then looked in a direction as if thinking of something and said, "From a young age, people has been praising me and treating me kindly, but that was only because of the Gremory in my name. To them I was not Rias, but the heiress of the Gremory clan. Even my own father set me up with Riser, saying that it was my job as being the heiress of Gremory clan. He put the Gremory name before me, and that's why I don't want to be married to a person who only liked the Gremory and not the Rias behind that name." She then looked down with a saddened expression and said, "My only dream is to make others recognize me not because of me being a Gremory, but because I am Rias. I want to marry a person who likes me because I am Rias. That's why I came to the human world. Here people don't look at me with me being a Gremory, but because I am Rias. I feel happy here rather than being in Underworld where my only worth is because I am Gremory." She then had a determined look on her face and said, "That's why there is no way that I am going to lose tomorrow. I will show them that I can become great just being Rias and not a Gremory." Isami then looked at her and said, "I don't know if it will help or not, but I admire you a bit. Not because you are a Gremory, but for who you are." Rias then smiled, and so did Isami. Both of them then looked at Tatsuya, to which he raised his eyebrows and asked, "What?" Both of them didn't said anything and kept on looking at him, and after finally realizing what they were trying to ask, he said, "You want my opinion on this as well?" Tatsuya then sighed and said, "To put it simply, I don't care about all this stuff. I only judge a person by how he acts in front of my eyes. If I deem him worthy of my respect, then he gets my respect of not even if the whole world were to collapse, then too he will only see me showing him my middle fingers. I don't even care about that your brother is a Mao, so judging you on the basis of you being a Gremory is simply a waste of my time. I will only judge you from what I see about you. Until now, I have seen that you skipped your training a lot." At this, Rias got surprised and looked away from him, and Tatsuya started chuckling also with Isami. He then looked at both of them and said, "Now, it is already very late, and I advise you to go in and have some rest. Tomorrow is a big day for both of you." Both of them nodded their heads, and then Rias said, "What would you be doing? Shouldn't you come in and sleep as well?" Tatsuya lied back on the ground and said, "Nah, I will stay just here and enjoy the night sky," and close his eyes. But soon he noticed someone lying beside him and asked, "Both of you, what are you doing now?" Rias just came closer to him and said, "Just let me sleep like this for tonight." Isami said, "And I am here to make sure that you not do anything perverted." Tatsuya looked at her with a deadpan expression and said, "You are the last person that I want to hear that from." He then sighed, "Well, do as you want, but I cannot guarantee that Miyuki will not freeze your body up for doing this." Both of them just hummed and then silently drifted off to sleep. The next morning, when Tatsuya woke up, he felt that there was a lot of weight over his body and his face was covered by something soft which he thought to be a pillow. He then tried to move his hand to shive the pillow away, only to find that his hand was also trapped by something. Seeing that there was no other way, he decided to open his eyes, and the first thing that welcomed him was a slightly pink-looking protrusion over his pillow. Tatsuya kept on looking the protrusion for a while, and then, as if lighting hit him, his eyes opened widely, and has used some force to move away, and stood up. After taking in a deep breath, he looked back to where he was sleeping and found two girls lying there, with one of them being partially naked as her small clothes were messed up and were not covering some areas, and the other one completely naked and sleeping there without any care to this world. The girls, of course, were Rias and Isami, with Rias being the completely naked one. He then looked at Isami's exposed breast and now knew what the pillow over his face was. He then sighed and formed a huge ball of cold water over the sleeping girls and then dropped the ball over them, making them wake up in panic. Tatsuya looked at both of them, who were breathing heavily, and said with a smile on his face, "Rise and shine. I hope that both of you slept well." Hearing his voice, both the girls glared at him, and on seeing them, the thought that came to Tatsuya's mind was, Isami with drenched clothes is looking way hotter than the completely naked Rias. Not good, not good. It's still morning. I cannot let my thoughts be corrupted so early in the morning. Rias didn't know, but somehow she still felt that Tatsuya was thinking something rude about her. Tatsuya continued to smile and looked at Rias and asked, "Rias, if I may, why are you completely naked when you slept with your clothes still on?" Rias then showed a proud smile and said, "It's one of my many talents. No matter how many layers of clothes I wear before sleeping, I'm always able to take them off during the course of night without even being conscious." Tatsuya's brows were twitching, and he immediately bonked her head, making her groan in pain, and shouted, "That type of thing in no way is a freaking talent. And wear some clothes already." Rias ignored him and crossed her arms, lifting her huge breasts before saying, "No, that is indeed a talent. To be able to do that while one is sleeping is just incredible." Tatsuya had a marks appeared on his forehead, said, "At best it could be considered a disease, like sleepwalking." Rias's face twitched a bit, and she said, "You have some nerve to call my talent a disease." Suddenly the atmosphere around them turned cold, and they felt someone releasing some pressure on them. "It is you who have a nerve to show your slutty body to Oni Aisama, you redhead bitch." Hearing that voice, Rias's whole body shivered, and she gulped her saliva. She then looked at the direction where the voice came from and saw Miyuki walking towards them with her sword unsheathed. She then looked at Tatsuya with a pleading gaze, to which Tatsuya said, "I warned you last night. Do it at your own risk." Miyuki kept walking towards her and said, "Let me show you my talent as well. I am good at skewering bitches with an ice spike in the ass." She then showed a smile and said, "Tell you what, I will do you a favor and shove it from the front hole. You wanted to lose your virginity, right?" Rias was sweating bucket, and her legs were shaking out of fear. Miyuki then raised her sword, and suddenly a huge ice spike came from under Rias's feet, who was somehow able to dodge the spike. She then looked at the spike with fear and thought, "She is serious. She is really going to skewer me." and started running away. Miyuki, who saw her running away, started to follow her, but she simply walked while continuously giving rise to various ice spikes. Tatsuya looked at the scene in front of him with a complex feelings. On one hand, she was having pity for Rias, while on the other, he was finding it funny. But even though his thoughts were complex on Thing was sure. I guess today, she will show her training seriously for compensating for all other days. Though why is she running around the villain naked like an exhibitionist pervert? He then sighed and gave a telepathic message to Miyuki, telling her to maintain a good distance away from the pervert. He then looked at Isami, who was looking at the scene in front of her and was feeling complicated as well, and blushed on seeing her still in her drenched outfit. He then said, "Though I think that you are looking very tempting and sexy in your current outfit, I would advise you to change as soon as you can if you don't want to catch cold." She then looked at her appearance and covered her body and said, "Tatsuya no Eki." Tatsuya's lips twitched when he heard her calling him a pervert. He then sighed and said, "Just go and change your clothes." Isami looked at him with a shocked expression and said, "What? Aren't you tempted by my appearance? Are you not going to violate my body?" Tatsuya looked at her with a neutral expression and said, "I will tell this to Miyuki and will ask her to train you the next time," and started towards the villa, leaving behind a shivering Isami. Later that day, Tatsuya and his team returned back to their house in Kuo and left behind the Grimory group who were going to fight in the raiding game at night. Though technically Tatsuya and his team were not allowed to watch their game, as they were not devils, but since both the participating parties knew them, they were allowed to observe the match along with Sona and Tsubaki. All of them had already encouraged the Grimory group, as they would not be meeting before the game after that, and will only be available after the game was over. Right now, Sona, Tsubaki, and Tatsuya's team, except for Tatsuya, who is currently working and promised to come as before the match begins, was sitting in the observation room and were waiting for the match to commence. Sona looked at the group of girls sitting beside her and asked, "Who do you think would win?" All of them didn't wait for long and said, "As long as they don't self-destruct, Rias's team will win." Though if Riser-san's team had also made preparations for the game, then we don't know. Sona nodded and looked at the screen and said, "Oh, the field is about to be shown now." And just as she said that, an exact replica of the Kuo Academy was shown to them. Sona rubbed her chin and said, "Looks like Lucifer-sama pulled some strings in order to at least give a home ground advantage to Rias." At the same instant, the whole Tatsuya team said, "He is a Siscon after all." Sona nodded her head and then said, "Well, home ground advantage will be a great help to Rias, but it does not change the fact that Riser is both strong and experienced, and that too coupled with his insane regeneration. This is going to be quite tough for Rias." Soon both the peerages were sent to their respective headquarters, and then the cold tone of Graphia addressed them, saying, "The time to make your plans begins now." And a bell was then rung. While both the teams were forming their strategies and the others were waiting for the match begin, Sona had a lot of thoughts going through her mind, and she then looked at Tatsuya's team and asked, "Hey, mind if I ask you a question?" His team looked at her and asked what. Sona then said, "Why did Tatsuya help her? Because as far as I know, he don't have a good opinion of Rias." All the girls in Tatsuya's team looked at each other as if discussing something which they were actually doing with their telepathy. Miyuki then looked at her and said, "We can tell you, but you have to promise that you are not going to utter a word about this outside." Sona, who heard the serious tone of Miyuki, also became serious and thought about the condition for a while before agreeing to it. Miyuki then nodded her head and said, "You see, just like you said, Oni Isama doesn't have a good impression of the redhead. He don't like people who are way too spoiled and don't even give an effort to solve their problems. The actual reason for what he did is that he was willing to help her peerage, not her." Sona became confused by her words and asked, "What does that mean? Can you explain it in simple terms?" Miyuki then said, "What I mean to say is that Oni Isama does not care about whether that redhead marries Riser-san or not. What he is worried about is her peerage members getting dragged with her. You see, and Oni Isama have a good opinion about her peerage members. Kiba-san is Oni Isama's good friend. Kaneko is obedient and hardworking even though she had gone through a lot, Then there is Isami, who has become like a sister to all of us, and Oni Isama care for her as well, which is shown by how much effort he put in training her for all this time. And even though Akino-san has that side to her, she helps us wherever she can and is also doing most of her king's work. And there is also a request to help her whenever we can. She was about to continue, but Sona interjected her and asked, "Wait, how do you know about Kaniko's past? Because as far as I remember, she never tells about that to anyone." Miyuki just smiled and said, "That is none of your concern. We have our own methods." And now, where was I? Sona felt a bit annoyed, but left it at that, as she knew that everyone has their ways of accessing information. Miyuki then continued, "So like I was saying, Oni Isama only help her to help our friends from not getting dragged with her, because as you may know how power-hungry you devils can get. Once they come to know that Isami has the busseted gear and Kaniko's origins, they will start to look at them with breeding livestock. Also, there is Akino-san whose body is enough to make most of the men lust over her, and being under same roof as Riser, that is sure to happen." Sona then thought for a while and said, "Then why did he even bother to encourage Rias if he only wanted to help her peerage?" At her question, the girls in Tatsuya's team looked at her weirdly, and Miyuki said, "Sona, I didn't expect you to ask such a question." Hearing this, Sona's lips twitched, but she controlled herself from lashing out. Miyuki then sighed and said, "You are her childhood friend, right? So you must be knowing her quite well." Sona only nodded her head in approval. Miyuki also nodded her head and said, "Then what do you think will happen if Oni Isama were to directly say that she was hopeless and would only help her peerage?" She then paused for a while and then said, "Being the spoiled princess that she would surely reject his offer and would also try to prove that she was not hopeless by directly try to fight Riser, who is leagues above her. Honestly, she would not even be able to follow the movements of his knights, and knowing the endurance of her body, the game would be lost without any of the other members of her team fighting." Himari and the other Nekashu then interjected and said, "And besides, he never truly encouraged her. He was not even bothered even when we informed him that Rias was not doing her training, yet he would sometimes help the other members of her team. And just last night we picked up the sound of both of them talking about something being recognized as Rias and not as a Gremory. He explained to her that he didn't believe in titles and all only accept who is worthy by what he sees, which made her feel relieved. But what she failed to catch on was that he never said that he deemed her worthy for the whole time he was talking. They then crossed their arms and said, "And what is that not liking to be seen as a Gremory? All the wealth, authority, and connections that she have are all because she is a Gremory. All the servants that she have except for Isami are all the ones which were recommended to her by someone in her family, and you must be knowing what method did she use to get Isami in her peerage. Even the authority that she has over Kuo was given to her because Surzex asked for it despite knowing how bad her administration skills are." They then sighed and then said, "All in all, what I am saying is that all that she is because she is a Gremory, and when it is asked of her to do some proper duty as a Gremory, she is saying that she don't want to be recognized as a Gremory. I mean, come on, is this a joke to her? Even if the condition for her was to marry a person who she does not like, instead of training herself and her peerage, she runs here to the human world while also taking over the town without giving a damn about the security of the people living here. Many people died because she didn't took proper attention about the stray devils, fallen angels, and priests coming to this town. Despite knowing that Kuo is currently a devil territory, she didn't inquire any of them on entering the town without permission, and when asked why, she would say that it would lead to war. Like seriously, some unauthorized people try to enter your territory, and do you, instead of questioning them, let them roam free and do what they want?" Sona remained silent for a while, and then said, "I can understand what you want to say, but from what I just heard, don't you all think the same about me? After all, I am the Citri heiress as well, and all the things that I have are because of the Citri name?" On hearing her question, Miyuki shook her head and said, "No, you are not the same. Even though you are the Citri heiresses and receive all the privileges of being one as well, you do not neglect your duty as one. Even you got out of your engagement by your own efforts, and we both know that the areas which are under your supervision in town are safe. And do you really think that he would have accepted your confession if he thought that you were troublesome or spoiled? You work hard, Sona, and you help your peerage as well. All of us, including Oni Aisama, know that. Sona became happy that all of them thought so good of her, and so were the thoughts of Tsubaki. Sona then adjusted her glasses and said, "But then doesn't mean that you all were somewhat lying to Rias and were making her hopes rise up." All the girls shrugged their shoulders and said, "Were we? We never said anything to her that was a lie." Thought Essie never told the truth to her as well. But we still didn't lie a bit. I will still say that Rias would win this game, but that's only if she doesn't do something reckless like confronting Riser or his queen on her own. Even Oni Aisama said, as long as she don't get overconfident over the achievements of her servants and starts decided to attack Riser on her own, she can win. Sona had a sweat drop when she heard that and said, "You people are really scary. I don't know what would have happened to me if I was spoiled like Rias." All of them just laughed and then looked back at the screen to observe the match. Right now, Tatsuya and the others were sitting in the administration room waiting for the game to begin, and Tatsuya was silently eating some coffee, jelly, ignoring the complaints from the other people who were currently tied to their chairs. "Oni Aisama / Tatsuya, release me, please. I was just trying to protect you from being violated by these horny beasts," all of them said in unison. Tatsuya didn't even look at them and said, "No need for that, just sit silently and watch the game. I have a feeling that as soon as you all are released, I would be raped by you all." Before they were able to complain again, the door of the room was knocked, and after a while it opened, revealing the silver-haired Bustum maid, Grafia. All of them looked at her and were wondering what she was doing there. Grafia then walked towards Tatsuya and asked, "I will be the one who will be acting as the announcer of this game, but due to some accidents the announcing room is currently out of service. So would it be possible to do my work from here?" Meanwhile, at the announcing room, Random Devil One. Why is the whole room covered in ice? He then looked at his watch and said, "And that too when the game is about to begin." Luckily, because of Miss Grafia's quick thinking, we were able to avoid any major disturbance. Tatsuya didn't wait for anyone's opinion and said, "Sure, I would love to have your company," and smiled at her. Hearing that, Grafia blushed a bit, but soon composed her expression and sat on the same sofa on which Tatsuya was sitting while sticking close to him. All the girls looked at her with a glare and thought, "Horny maid," but didn't say anything as they saw Grafia turning the mic on, and now there was a chance of their talks being heard by others. All of them then sighed and silently looked at the screens in front of them. Tatsuya noticed that the girls have calmed down quite a lot, and once he checked that they were not planning anything weird, by his telepathy, he silently undid the ropes which were binding them. Tatsuya then looked at the screen and heard the bell ring signifying the start of the game. Tatsuya looked at the screen intently and thought, "Now let's see how the game unfolds." At the game field, just now the bell has just ring, which signified the start of the game. Rias looked at her team and then said, "Yudo, Kaneko, now go and set the traps." Akino checked the area from above and set some traps as well. All of them nodded and said, "Yes, President," and left the ORC building. Aisami looked at Rias and asked, "What would you want me to do, Prez?" Rias looked at her with a smile and said, "Lie down on the sofa, and I will release Dash." Just as she was about to continue, Aisami stopped her and said, "If this is about releasing some of the stored power of my pieces, Tatsuya has already done that." At her words, Rias was very shocked, as Tatsuya was able to break the seal on her piece's son easily, but shrugged it off, said, "Well, it works for me anyways." Soon the other three came back, and after Rias explained their roles, once all of them left the building, except Rias. Kiba went into the forest. Akino changed into her shrine maiden outfit and started flying in the sky. Aisami and Kaneko did their final preparations, and then Aisami asked, "Kaneko-chan, you remember the mission, right?" Kaneko nodded her head and said, "And find the sister chicken and beat her to crap." At her words, Aisami's sweat dropped and said, "Not that. I'm talking about taking over the gymnasium." Kaneko then looked like she just realized something and said in her usual cold tone, "Ah, that as well." Aisami's lips twitched and she thought, "That is our priority, though." And then both of them started moving towards the gymnasium. Soon both of them were in the gymnasium and were hiding behind the curtains on the stage. Aisami observed the area around her and said silently, "Even the whole gymnasium is the same as the one in the academy. Soon both her and Kaneko felt someone coming through the gate and got alert. From the gate, 4 girls from Riser's peerage came. 3 pawns, Isle, Nell, Mira, and 1 took Shualon. They walked a bit further in the room, and then a girl wearing Chinese clothes with her black hair tied in buns on both sides called out, "Come out, servants of Rias Gremory, we know that you are there." And hearing that, both Kaneko and Isami came out. The girl then looked at the both of them and said, "Oh, the rook and the pawn, huh?" She then paused for a while and then said, "I am Riser-sama's rook, Shualon." Then a girl with a lean figure and blue hair who was wielding a bow staff said, "Mira, a pawn." The lowly twins looked at them cheerfully and said, "I'll a pawn, Nell a pawn." Kaneko looked at her opponents and muttered, "The chicken is not here." She then looked at Isami and said, "I will take on the rook. You go for the pawn, senpai." Isami nodded her head and then raised her hand and said, "Boosted gear." A red gauntlet materialized in her hand and shouted, "Boost," and gave out a green glow. Both of them then jumped from the stage and landed in front of their enemies and started attacking each other. The other party also didn't stand still and intercepted their attacks. Shualon covered her feet with flames and started kicking towards Kaneko by using Kung Fu, making Kaneko focus on the defense. Kaneko blocked all the attacks which were thrown by her thanks to her improved reaction time, and was now waiting for an opening to strike her enemy. She received the opportunity soon when she saw Shualon raising her feet high to make a strong attack, but before she was even able to raise her leg to the highest, Kaneko punched her with all the strength she had, making Shualon spit out some saliva from her mouth with a surprised look in her eyes. Kaneko then looked at her fist in surprise and thought, "That rook was really a high-level one, and yet I was able to inflict some severe damage with just 1 punch." She then exhaled, thinking that her training really paid off, and looked at her opponent, who was clutching her stomach with a look of pain evident in her eyes, and cracked her knuckles and said, "Let's finish this soon," and launched at her opponent. On Isami's side, she was continuously evading all the attacks that were made by the chainsaws and the bow staff of the pawns, and kept on boosting. "Boost!" She then saw Mira running towards her and trying to aim for his chest. Isami then crouched down, evaded the attack, and quickly swept her leg, making Mira fall on the ground. She then saw the twins jump on her while saying, "We will dismantle you," with a cheerful smile on their faces. Isami looked at her with a weird expression and said, "That's not a thing that you should be saying with such cheerful smile," and picked Mira's staff up and attacked both the twins' hands, making them drop their fire-covered chainsaws. "Boost!" Isami smirked and said, "Right on time," and pointed her hand in front of her. Explosion! A red orb of the size of volleyball appeared in front of her hand. Yeah, it is bigger than it was shown in the anime. She then heard Kaneko say, "Let's finish this soon." She smiled as well and said, "I plan to do the same as well." And then at the same moment, Kaneko covered her fist with some magic, and then both Isami and Kaneko punched in the forward direction. Kaneko hitting Shualon, and Isami hitting the red orb while shouting, "Dragon shot!" And a huge red beam traveled very fast towards the pawns, engulfing them in the wave, making them scream in pain, along with Shualon, who was punched with a magic-covered fist. Soon the front of the gymnasium, along with some more buildings, were destroyed by Isami's attack, and Kaneko looked at the destruction caused by it with a shocked expression. Both of them then looked at each other and said at the same time, "When did you come up with such an attack, Kaneko-chan/senpai?" Following that was an awkward silence, and then Kaneko said, "I came up with this attack after seeing Asia senpai using her fists covered with healing magic." Isami nodded and said, "Tatsuya taught me this attack, saying that it is simple as well as effective at the same time." Riser-sama's 3 pawn and 1 rook retired. Both of them then heard a voice on their transmitter which said, "Isami, Kaneko, I just saw an explosion. Are both of you fine?" Isami nodded her head and said, "Yeah, we are fine, and we secured the gymnasium." Rias, who was sitting on the sofa in the ORC clubroom, smiled and said, "Good. Now get out of there quickly and help Yudo." Both of them nodded and then left the gymnasium quickly. Both Isami and Kaneko were running towards the sports field where they had decided to meet with Kiba. Suddenly, both of them felt an attack coming towards them, and both of them immediately juned to their sides. As soon as both of them landed, they saw a huge explosion in front of them and noticed that they were only a few centimeters away from the explosion's radius. Both of them then looked up to see who attacked them, and found a lady with a purple hair and a huge, exposed chest with a cane in her hand there. Isami narrowed her eyes and said, You must be Riser's queen, right? The lady who was flying in the air smirked and said, Yes, I am Yubaluna, Riser-sama's queen, and fired another attack at both of them, but before it could reach them, a lightning was shot at it, nullifying it along with an explosion. All three of them looked towards the direction where the lightning was shot from and saw Akino wearing her priestess clothes with her wings out. She then looked at her teammates and said, Era, having some trouble. Don't worry, I will handle her. You two go ahead. Isami and Kaneko nodded their heads and again started running towards the sports field. Akino then looked at Yubaluna, who was smirking, and said, I was always looking for a chance to fight against you, priestess of thunder. Akino just smiled and put her hand over her mouth and said, Era, the pleasure is all mine, Bomb Queen San. And a yellow aura started to come out of her body, and seeing that Yubaluna also started to release her violet aura, and then both of them started firing their spells at each other. Isami and Kaneko kept on running, and then suddenly heard 3 of Riser-sama's pawns retired. Both of them smiled, and Isami said, That must be Kiba. As soon as she said that, Kiba came from the side and said, Yo. Both Kaneko and Isami stopped on their tracks and said, Kiba, why are you here? Didn't we agree on meeting at the sports field? Kiba gave a helpless smile and said, Yes, we did plan that, but President asked us to wait for a while and regroup first before taking any actions. Isami and Kaneko were surprised by the order, and Isami said, Why? We have to get there sooner or later, and as soon as we reach there, we can advance forward by attacking them one by one. That will be favorable for us, right? Kaneko also nodded her head and said, I also think that this plan is better. If we wait and then go, there's a chance for them to attack us all together, and their numbers are already higher than us. Isami nodded and said, Yes, even though I believe that we can defeat all of them, but it will still take a lot of time for us to deal with them, and it will be much more tiring than fighting them individually. Kiba also nodded his head and said, I know that as well, but President thinks that Riser will send all the remaining pieces after us, and it will make the path towards their king devoid of enemies. Isami and Kaneko looked at him with a weird expression and said, We know that as well, but what good will it do after the path is clear and no one is attacking him? This will only take much more time, and it will exhaust us more before fighting the king. Kiba thought for a while and then said, I believe that she is planning on taking him head-on. Isami and Kaneko were again surprised by this, and Isami used her transmitter and asked Rias, Prez, are you planning on taking that Riser guy on your own? Rias, who was surprised by the question, first calmed herself and said, Yes, that's why I want you 3 to deal with the rest of his peerage while Akino is busy with the queen. Isami then asked, But isn't that guy's regeneration too fast? How are you going to defeat him? Rias then said, Even though his regeneration is too fast and his body is technically immortal, but his mind isn't. We can defeat him if we made his mind unable to process the situation. There is also the fact that regeneration takes both demonic power and stamina to work, so if I am able to make him exhausted, he will not be able to regenerate. All 3 of them thought for a while, and then realized that her plan could work. Isami, who was now somewhat believing her, asked, But how are you going to achieve what you just said? Rias just said, Don't worry, I have a plan for that. Now you 3 go to the sports field and engage his peerage, and cut her connection. All 3 of them looked at each other, and then Kiba said, Anyway, let's go. We can only follow her orders now. We have already missed the opportunity to fight them individually. Both Isami and Kaneko sighed and nodded their heads, and all 3 of them started running towards the sports field, in the ORC room. Rias, who had just cut the connection, said, Now I just have to wait for a while, and once the path is clear, I will attack him. Seriously, my peerage is really strong. Being able to defeat multiple enemies on their own makes it even clear that I, who is their king, should be able to deal with him in a one-on-one easily. I just have to attack him continuously, making him regenerate over and over again, and once he will be exhausted, then it is my win. In the administration room, Tatsuya, who just heard Rias's plan through the small device that he had placed on all of them before the game for the very same purpose, facepalmed. He then said, "This was what I was worried about. She became overconfident because of her peerage's strength. Does she truly believes that Riser will just stand still while she will be attacking him continuously?" The others in the room who also heard her plan nodded their heads, and then Sona said, "And even if Riser did according to Rias's imagination, I know that her own demonic power is quite less as compared to Riser. She will be the one to exhaust first, even if everything goes by her plan." She then glared at Tatsuya and said, "By the way, you do know that it is illegal to plant a spying device on the participants before the game. What would you do if the higher-ups come to know about this?" Tatsuya just smiled and said, "That is only if they hear about it. You think that despite knowing about the rules, I would make tiny mistakes like this? They will only know about this as long as this talk don't leave the room." Sona, who heard that, nodded her head, but then an idea came to her mind, and she smirked before his asking, "So what would I get for keeping my mouth shut?" Tatsuya looked at her with a surprised expression and then said, "Would a date with you alone suffice?" Sona, who heard that, smiled and said, "Deal accepted." Suddenly, all the girls except Grafia raised their hands and said, "We want compensation as well." Tatsuya just sighed and said, "Why did I even let you all hear that? I should have just kept it to me." Sci-Fi and I agree to that. All of them nodded with a smile, but then the room suddenly became chilly and all of them looked at the silver-haired maid who was sitting beside Tatsuya. Tatsuya had a wry smile on his face, and he asked, "Of course, what would it take to keep your mouth shut, Grafia?" At that moment, all the girls in the room had the same thought, "Your cock." Tatsuya, who heard that through his telepathy, twitched his lips, but didn't say anything. Grafia then said, "Then there is a place that I want to go, but going there alone would be boring, so I would like you to accompany me there." Tatsuya looked at her for a while, and then said, "In other words, a date, right? Okay, I agree. Now, let's focus on the match." Rating game field. Right now, Isami, Kiba, and Kaneko are running towards the sports field as per Rias's orders. Isami then looked at her two teammates and asked, "Do you think that this plan will work?" Both of them then thought about the question for a while. Kiba said, "The possibility of this plan to work is very low, and I doubt that President has a proper plan to deal with Riser, but we cannot do anything about it. We have already lost the opportunity to fight with their members individually, and our only option is to fight there while group at once. If we don't stop them, they will gang up on President, and the game is immediately over. So all we can do now is defeat them as soon as possible and then head over to where their king is." Both Isami and Kaneko nodded their heads, and then Kaneko said, "I didn't know that even you can doubt President's plan, Yudo-senpai." Kiba showed a helpless smile and said, "If it was to me before training with Tatsuya's team, I would not have doubted her words, but all the hellish training I went through, I have come to understand the battlefield better. I have to admit Tatsuya has prepared his team to face of in any kind of situation. Even though all I was doing was getting hit by the punches, I came to understand a lot of things and even learned quite a lot from them." Kaneko then nodded and said, "The training was really an eye-opener. We didn't even knew what our weaknesses were at the beginning." All of them then sighed at the same time and said, "But his training is really hellish," and continued to run. Soon all three of them were present in the field, and Isami shouted, "Come out, Riser's peerage. We are here to fight you fair and square." She didn't want to waste any time and decided to call them herself instead of waiting for them to come on their own. Both Kiba and Kaneko, who understood her intentions, nodded, and Kiba whispered, "Smart move." Soon mist started to appear in front of them, and through the mist the silhouette of a girl was seen. The girl and then said, "You all are quite foolish to ask us to fight you directly, but I like fools like you. Behold yourself, I am Riser-sama's knight Carlamine." She then unsheathed her sword, which set ablaze on fire. Kiba then stepped forward and said, "I am Yudo Kiba, knight of Rias Gremory, and I shall be the one to fight you," and unsheathed his sword as well. Both of them then narrowed their eyes and started running towards each other and clashed their blades with their speed, keep on increasing as the number of times their swords clashed. Isami continued to look at their fight with a surprised expression and said, "He has become much faster." Kaneko-chan, are you able to follow their movements? Kaneko, in her usual cold voice, said, only barely. They're too fast for even my senses to catch up. Asami looked at them for a while and then said, wait, doesn't that mean that we don't have to do anything? As soon as she said that, both her and Kaneko heard a voice from behind. I don't think so. Both of them then turned around, and Kaneko's eyes looked at a certain person for a while, and then she said, chicken found. Asami looked at the blonde girl standing in front of her, but then she felt someone else's presence and turned her head and said, come out now. As she said that, a girl with short hair with her right half of the face covered with a white mask came and said, so you were able to sense me. You are not that worthless, you know. Asami then asked, who the hell are you? The girl then cracked her knuckles, and she said, I am Isabella Riser-sama's rook. The blonde-haired girl got a bit irritated and said, hey, don't ignore me. Kaneko then said, don't worry, I am continuously focusing on you and waiting to beat the crap out of you. Ravel, who heard Kaneko, looked at her more intently and said, ah, you are the person who ruined my alone time with Tatsuya-sama, and glared at her. Kaneko glared as well and said, and you are the one trying to seduce Senpai. Both of them kept on glaring at each other, and some sparks seemed to be forming between them. Ravel then looked at her side and said, all of you deal with the pawn. I have some matters to settle with this thieving cat. As soon as she said that, several more people appeared around them. Kaneko looked at Asami and said, can I leave these guys to you? Asami looked at her with a confident expression and said, sure. And Kaneko started chasing Ravel, who was flying on the sky. Asami looked at Isabella and said, hey, who was that blondie just now? Isabella looked at her and said, that's Ravel-sama, Riser-sama's little sister and his bishop. But don't worry about her. You should be worried about yourself and your master, who is struggling there. At her words, Asami's eyes widened, and she looked at the top of the building and saw Rias trying to attack Riser, who was not even giving her a chance by continuously attacking her, which made her to only stand at one place with a barrier in front of her. Asami gritted her teeth and thought, what should we do? If we don't hurry, we will be defeated. Suddenly, they heard an announcement was heard. One of Riser-sama's knights retired. Asami looked towards Kiba and saw the knight from Riser's peerage disappearing into light particles. Suddenly an idea came to her mind, and she said, Kiba, liberate your sacred gear immediately. Kiba looked at her in surprise and decided to trust her and said, here it comes, sword birth. And immediately an energy was thrown towards Asami. Asami then pointed her hand towards the energy and let it get stored in her gauntlet. The red gauntlet in her hand glowed and shouted, transfer, and Asami smashed her hand in the ground, creating a large number of swords around her. Seeing all the swords appear around them, the remaining members of Riser's peerage, along with Kiba and Kaneko, were shocked. Soon all the remaining members of Riser's peerage, except Ravel, were stabbed by the swords and were retired immediately. One knight, one bishop, one rook, and two pawns of Riser-sama's peerage retired. Asami then raised her hand and said, now that's badass. I didn't know that it would work so well. Kiba, who heard her, looked at her in disbelief and asked, you mean to say that you used that attack without even knowing what you were doing? Asami then showed a thumbs up and said, nope. After all, I only unlocked this power yesterday. Busseted gear. Gift sure is a very nifty ability. Asami then turned serious and said, anyway, Kiba, go to Akino-san and help her defeat the queen as soon as possible, and then come and assist us. We're going to deal with Riser. Kaneko looked at Asami and asked, is it necessary to go now? Dodged a fireball. I have yet to settle my business with her. Punched through one of the bigger fireballs. Asami looked at her with a serious expression and said, yes, we need to go immediately or the Prez will be defeated. All our effort will be in vain. Kaneko nodded reluctantly and looked at Ravel, who had fire revolving around her, and said, we will settle this matter later. Chicken. Ravel also glared at Kaneko and said, sure, come anytime, you thieving cat. She then paused for a while and said, except when I am alone with Tatsuya-sama. Those moments are for me to enjoy. Kaneko, who heard her, gritted her teeth and ran towards Rias along with Asami without saying anything. In another location of raiding game field, Aquino was looking down on Yubaluna, who was currently in a very bad condition after their fight. Aquino herself was in tattered clothes, but was still doing better than the queen. Yubaluna looked at Aquino with a smile and said, "You really live up to your name, Priestess of Thunder." Aquino just smiled and said, Era, you were plenty strong yourself, Bomb Queen." Yubaluna continued to smile and said, "But still you must be pretty tired to help your remaining peerage from the attacks of our peerage." Aquino just smiled and said, "No, even if I'm a bit tired from all the attacks, I can still help my friends even if I don't rest." Suddenly an announcement was made. One knight, one bishop, one rook, and 2 pawns of Riser Sama's peerage retired. Hearing the announcement, Yubaluna was dumbfounded, and Aquino giggled and said, "Era, looks like my help was not needed after all." Yubaluna looked at Aquino with rage and said, "I will take you down," and put her hand to her cleavage and took out a vial with a red cap on top of it. Seeing the vial, Aquino frowned and knew that she would not be able to cast her magic immediately. Yubaluna smirked as she knew what Aquino was thinking and opened the vial and was about to drink the contents in it. But suddenly they heard a voice which said, "Not so fast," and suddenly a blur passed by both of them. Yubaluna, who was surprised by the voice, looked back at the vial and saw that it was not there and began to panic. Looking for this, both Aquino and Yubaluna turned their heads and were surprised to see Kiba holding the vial in his hand. They were not surprised by Kiba holding the vial. What they were surprised by was, "Kiba, why are you holding the open vial upside down?" Kiba, who heard the words, looked at his hands and saw that he was indeed holding the vial upside down, and it was already empty. He then looked down at the ground and saw that a small portion of the land was about wet. Kiba then scratched his cheek and said, "Looks like I took the vial in the same position that she was holding to pour it on herself," and gave a wry smile. Both Yubaluna and Aquino were looking at him with a weird expression and were not sure what to think of him. Aquino then sighed and said, "Anyways, let's forget about that. Now back to you, Bomb Queen," and showed a sadistic smile, and electricity started to come out of her hand. Yubaluna, who looked at Aquino's sadistic smile, was a bit scared and was about to use her magic to attack her. But before she was able to, Aquino immediately came close to her and placed her hand on her exposed chest and started electrocuting her, making Yubaluna scream, which only made Aquino smile in bliss. Kiba, who looked with a scared expression on his face, thought, and she is supposed to have toned down her urges after the training. Soon Aquino stopped electrocuting Yubaluna when she saw that she was severely damaged and said, "Ah, you already broke," and then Yubaluna started to disappear in light particles. Riser Sama's queen retired. Kiba, who heard the announcement, looked at Aquino and said, "We should be going now, President is in danger." Aquino, who heard that, came out of her stupor and turned serious and said, "Let's go then," and both of them started to fly towards Rias and the others.
Hello, everyone. As we wrap up this video, I want to share a quick note. I have a Patreon account. If you'd like to support me and enjoy on-demand audiobooks, you can become a Patreon member. Alternatively, you can check out my Google Drive link, which has 500+ novel audiobooks available through my Ko-fi or Patreon shop. I appreciate your support.